Hello and welcome to this Omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a special guest from the world of Whodom to choose a story for me to commentate along to and to try and guess what their favourite things about each episode are.
Hello Toby and hello everyone. My name is Richard Bignell. I am the editor of Nothing at the End of the Lane, the Doctor Who magazine of research and restoration. I was one of Doctor Who magazine's original time team, along with Jacqueline Rayner, Clay Hickman and Peter Ware, and for the past 20 years I've been working as part of the team producing the BBC range of Doctor Who DVD and Blu-ray releases. Now for those, I produced a majority of the Now and Then location features. I act as a researcher and advisor to a lot of the content producers. I've written production subtitles, and now I act as the curator on the massive PDF archive that appears on the Blu-ray releases. And as of the time of recording, we put together nearly 25,000 pages worth of material on the sets. So, what adventure have I chosen for you to have a look at this time for Happy Times and Places? Well, we're going to go back to 1975. It's a story that encompasses 3 different locations across 2 different planets and 3 different time zones. From season 13, it's Pyramids of Mars. Now, why have I chosen this particular story? Well, season 13 has something of a special place in my heart. I was 9 years old when this story was shown, and like many children, Doctor Who scared me witless and enthralled me at the same time. But season 13 was important for me because it was the very last time that I was genuinely terrified of the programme. You see, up to the end of the Seeds of Doom, I always watched Doctor Who from behind the safety of a security cushion. But something happened to me between seasons 13 and 14, because it was at that point that I morphed from being an enthralled viewer into being a fan. And I know that it happened then because just when season 14 was about to begin, for the very first time, I went out and with my own money, I bought a copy of the Radio Times just so that I could have the cuttings for the start of The Mask of Mandragora. Target's first Doctor Who monster book came out just after Pyramids of Mars had finished on television, so that probably had quite a lot to do with it as well. Now, Pyramids was also important to me in another way, because around November 1976, my parents bought me my very first cassette recorder, and at the end of that same month, the BBC showed the 1-hour compilation version of Pyramids of Mars. So that marked the very first time that I ever audio taped a Doctor Who story from the television. And I played that tape to death. Now, I no longer have it anymore, but I can still see it in my mind's eye. The beige colour plastic, the orange label, and my 10-year-old scrawled handwriting on it. There is so much to love about this particular story, Toby, so I hope that you and everyone else will have great fun watching it again.
Oh, well, thanks to Richard for all that fascinating detail. Richard is one of the good guys of Doctor Who, one of the best of the good guys. He's done so much research for the DVDs and Blu-rays, and he's one of those people that everybody will occasionally have the need to ask a question of, and he's always ready with an answer. And in fact, sometimes unsolicited. I know he was researching something and he'd got a spare half an hour, or he'd finished early. So while he was there, he did a load of Quatermass scanning and delving and sent it to me off his own back without me asking, without me knowing he was going to do it. He's so helpful and he's such a nice guy. And Doctor Who archaeology owes him so much. So appropriate that we're going to go digging in some stock footage of Egypt to see what's going on Pyramids of Mars. It's usually in the top 10 in Doctor Who magazine polls and things like that. So I don't think we're going to have too much trouble with this one. This is one of the last Doctor Who stories I actually watched for pleasure. I was going to say relatively recently, because it was last Christmas I gave myself a week off and watch some Doctor Who for fun, and this was one of them. And I've realised it's now November, so Christmas wasn't as recently as I thought. Talk about walking in eternity. Anyway, you're welcome. Let's set sail for Stargroves. And I don't know about you, but I watch my Pyramids of Mars on lovely DVD. So I'm going to press enter on play all in 3, 2, 1. There we go. And it's beginning. So, now this is a curious one for me because I had the VHS of this, which was edited together. And I didn't realise at the time, not only was it edited together, it was actually had bits taken out of it. Richard referred to the hour-long cut there, which I've never seen or heard. And I'm sure that will be so entrenched in his memory that certain scenes in this will seem like interlopers. But stock footage of Egypt coming up is very economical, the way it sets the scene. But so there are various bits that I didn't realise until... I think I knew, but I'd not experienced the missing bits until it was then repeated when I was at university. They did some Doctor Who repeats, and I was a busy student, being young and exciting. And it was on a Sunday afternoon, I think. And so I grabbed a spare VHS. I'd taken all my Doctor Who VHSs with me to studentdom. Of course I did. I carried them around in a trunk. And I'd got one that had got an E180 that had got a 4-parter at the beginning, and the beginning of the first 3 episodes of another 4-parter that I think I then got a better quality copy of somehow because I taped over whatever that was. I think it was 3 episodes of Spearhead from Space or something. And I taped episodes 1 and 3, and then I taped 4 on another tape that chewed up, so I never got to keep 4 properly, and so I didn't actually see Pyramids of Mars or get used to it in its entirety till it came out on DVD. So in that regard, it's one of the very last, so even though it's a story I'm really familiar with because I watched that edited VHS over and over again, it was one of the first handful of stories I had because it was wisely released on DVD on VHS early. But actually what I was enjoying was very much chopped about, and I would dare to say the chopping is not necessarily to its detriment. Now, I would always say you release the broadcast version, and I certainly was, crossed that there were no closing credits and episode endings and stuff like that. But I actually think it's quite sympathetically chopped, the VHS version. But maybe that's because it's the version I'm used to. A lot of our enjoyment of Doctor Who is very subjective and born of circumstance and time and place. So it's a very economical beginning. We need to suggest a dig in Egypt, bit of superstition, bit of danger at the front. You've got, 2 speaking actors, Vic Tablian, who's run off as Ahmed. He's done various bits and bobs, still around. In fact, he's the only human... he's the only... Sutek and a couple of his mummies are still with us, but... the rest of the human cast are gone, sadly. Tom Baker in this scene. Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen in this story are amazing. I adore this scene, that sort of drawn, solemn countenance that he has. I remember Doctor Who being sort of funny and a bit mad, and Tom Baker was the Doctor I grew up with. I'm too young to remember this when it first went out. And it was only rediscovering him later as a grown-up that, that sense of sort of universal melancholy, that sort of maudlin detachment that he has, that isn't boring, it's not dreary, it doesn't bring you down, it has resonance. He's got that wonderful voice, he's got that wonderful frame, but look, he's dressed as a lunatic, but the costume works. It's not zany, but it's a bizarre alchemy, isn't it? And look at, yes, he snaps at her, but there's never any sense that these people are squabbling in an annoying fashion. Even when they're arguing, I know there are some people that think Sarah says the F word there. No, she doesn't, and they would have cut that out or made her retake it if she had. She just goes, "Ah!" in that way that Elizabeth Sladen does. And this bit's brilliant as well, the materialisation. Sutek, I think, never quite looks as good as that again, because is that projected from film? It's just a better, the mask just, or whatever it is, looks very good there. in a way that doesn't quite sustain when we see it in the cold light of day. So beautiful close-up of her looking terrified. But even though he's sort of testy and grouchy at her, it's, as I say, it's not sort of infantile squabbling that passes as characterization. This is a sort of real relationship, and she reacts to it in that she sort of goes, she behaves as if, well, I'm sort of used to this, and this is the price that you pay for, travelling around with an eccentric Time Lord, and it's sort of water off a duck's back to her. She always just keeps it. There's no glibness here, but it's also not melodrama. It's just the actors are keeping our attention. They're maintaining a charismatic and enjoyable dynamic that is very, very watchable. I would want to travel with these two anywhere and forever. And I think even the scenes where they're just, look at Tom Baker. He looks so great, and there's a slight, he doesn't bite his lip so much, but he sort of does, metaphorically, if you like. He's there's a gritty danger to him as well. This is a terrific shot from Paddy Russell of the sarcophagus, and then it's the sarcophagus reflected in the mirror that's on the organ that's being played by the Egyptian in a fez. I mean, it's just got all of that sort of glorious sort of grand guignol. It's a Robert Holmes script, even though it's, Louis Griefer wrote the inspiration for it, and it's credited to Stephen Harris. There's nothing of Griefer's in it really, and it's all sort of literary form. It's the characters, and the imagery, and they're all bred of adventure serial, but he makes them something special, and he writes these types. They're all sort of types, literary types, almost pastiche, but they're written and they're played absolutely straight, and you can do that. I mean, it sounds like an oxymoron that they're going they're those pastiche types, but you believe in them. But if a certain type of acting and writing does that, and that does, this is a totally believable world contained within its own sense of melodrama, and the actors are totally committed to it. There's no sense that they're sending it up. And you could easily send up any of these characters. Warlock could be... any of them could be slayed with a slight edge of comedy. And it would still work. It would be a sort of knowing take on the genre. And it is knowing, and yet nobody's trying to be funny, although all of the performances have a certain sort of witty touch to them, but they're not winking at us as they do it. It's really cleverly judged, and it's a style of acting and presentation of character that totally fits with Doctor Who, I think. There's so many... Marie Antoinette lost her head for it. I mean, there's so many little bits of witty repartee bantering back and forth between these two, and then you've got the funny little butler character Michael Bilton, who always played old men. He's an old Time Lord in The Deadly Assassin. He's a non-speaking part in Quatermass 2. He goes back a long way. He is also in The Massacre, where he was cast by Paddy Russell, who must have first met him when she was a production assistant on or director's assistant on Quatermass 2. She might have met him many times elsewhere, but yeah, so she'd cast him in her first Doctor Who, and here he is again. Lovely actor. Had a late flourishing in a Yellow Pages commercial as an old retainer with a lawnmower, and was in Waiting for God with Stephanie Cole and Graham Crowden, set in an old people's home. Lovely character actor, and again he's playing a sort of type, but he's absolutely committed to it. He's absolutely delightful. You can tell Tom Baker is enjoying acting with him, which is always wonderful. When Tom's sort of going, I'm enjoying this performance, so I'm going to give it a little bit of deference. you can also sometimes tell, I think, when he's not quite so enamoured of somebody's performance, he's quite dismissive of it. And this, I mean, every time you think, okay, well, we're just going to have to get it, there's going to be a little bit of scene setting or something, or, something happening with the story. And that's good continuity acting of Tom there. Look, and then he does that. He does the gets down on his haunches to walk past the windows. It's, in lesser hands, that would be stupid. It's not. It's delightful. And notice I was watching an interview with Ken Grieve recently where he talked about, because I think Tom Baker likes to underplay his approach to acting and how good he is. And I think we sometimes just go, oh, well, yeah, he was just born to play the Doctor, which he was. But when he jumped out of that window, he just tipped his hat to the inside. Now, at this point, he hasn't done this studio work, but he's studied the script and he knows that they've just had a chat with a funny little butler that's probably going to be played by a character actor he's going to enjoy. So they jump out the window and he just does a little bit of a touch the hat to go, we've just come outside from talking with somebody, which is a very technically smart piece of acting, and the sort of thing you can lose track of if you're not doing, especially as these actors were very much used to, doing stuff in order. And it's only always been the sort of bits of pre-filming that take things out of order, and still very much everything's of the theatrical tradition. So he's on it. And I know he'd done film and stuff, but generally, the mindset that you're in. So that's the end of poor dear old Michael Bilton, which is rather sad because he's a very sweet character. Collins, the butler. And isn't all of this sort of Egyptian reliquary? I think. I mean, and these sort of old cases and these packing crates. It's all. Oh, it's very sad with his mouth open and dead. He's really committed to this, Peter Mayock, and I love the way Peter Copley sort of goes, "Yeah, all right, with your incantations." Because much as we like Dr. Warlock, of course, he's probably such a terrible old racist. But Copley's channeling that in a very smart way. He's another great character actor. Of sort of going, yeah, all right, you slightly intense man from a foreign clime. I shall be a bit more British about this. And but there's no sense that we as the audience are dismissive of Namin, partially because Peter Mayock is giving a very committed and intense performance. And this is interesting as well, is that, nobody particularly, I think, objects to this. Oh, people object to this bit. That they should anyway, because it's obviously a polystyrene sarcophagus. But again, no disrespect to Peter Mayock, who is acting his socks off to suggest that has any sort of weight to it at all. But then has to sort of slow down and hold it in place so that it doesn't fall over. But I love what he does with this, and of course, there's no way you'd cast him today. He was an Irishman, Peter Mayock. But it's because his makeup and hair is not quite as. I love all that, the Egyptian thing and the and I'm not sure. I'm not sure the incantation is in Egyptian in the script. I can't remember, but I've got a feeling that might have been an addition or a change to have it actually in Egyptian rather than him say, I command you by the great god Sutek to rise, or whatever it is he says, which again just gives it a little bit of authenticity within the melodrama. But it helps the melodrama because not being in English, it gives it a certain authenticity and a certain strangeness to us, but because he delivers it so well, it's authentic strangeness, even though it's probably hokey and nonsense and who knows if he's pronouncing it correctly, but it doesn't matter because they do it well. But because he's not as sort of blatantly under makeup as John Bennett is in The Talons of Weng Chiang, and I'm sure I will talk about all the issues that raises that I'm not blind to and I'm not dismissive of, and yet I don't think I've read many people moaning about Peter Mayock playing an Egyptian, but it's a similar in a fez. I mean, he's quite a stereotypical Egyptian, but because of his own colouring, I think, and because it's less blatant a transformation. We sort of let it go. Interesting. I say none of that with any judgment. because I think we can discuss historical depictions in television like adults without getting cross. We can't change what happened then, and that things happened then that we wouldn't do now. But it doesn't mean that the people that did those things then were bad, because they were at a time when that's how things were done. And hindsight is always 20/20, and sometimes I think you don't realise. I think it's fair to say you don't realise until you, yeah. I think I've got things to say about that side of things that I'll talk about with Talon's Weng Chiang, because I've also got a very interesting guest doing that one. So let's leave that to Talon's, because also it's 6 parts now. Loads loads of time to cover it. I love all of this shot. That shot of the mummy. I think the mummy costumes are great. Just having the bust. I don't know why it makes it seem like an alien version of a mummy, but the idea of having robotic mummies clambering around the woods. I mean, it sounds almost as daft, not quite as daft as Yetis in the Underground, which is another of Doctor Who's great moments, but it works because everybody plays it properly. A lot of this stuff was cut, wasn't it, in the VHS? A lot of this chase. Well, and actually, it doesn't need it, you know. And you wouldn't have this level of footage of this chase today. I think Elizabeth Sladen is beautiful, and I think she looks fantastic in that costume. And it's a nice, reedy little. It's not a guiro, is it? But it's a something or other, bit of percussion from Dudley Simpson. And yeah, it doesn't lose anything from having this cut, apart from the fact that it's really nicely done. It's really beautifully directed, and it's very, very tense. And so I perhaps only don't miss it because I was used to it not being there. Lots of blood on Warlock's hand as well. It's not often you see red blood in Doctor Who. And so we haven't had actually that much plot at all, but by God, it started as a lick, hasn't it? I mean, the Doctor, we've had a great Doctor Bignell. Oh, they did get they got the apparition in the TARDIS. So you go, oh, something's afoot, and then they land, and they're straight into the adventure. It's funny though, because I remember watching this with my well, we can talk about him in a bit. I'll carry on my thought because I'm told I interrupt myself too often. Watching this, and my brothers, who are older than me, had long since dismissed Doctor Who, and current Doctor Who is terrible, and it wasn't as good as when they were younger. I remember when I got this on VHS and had this on at home, and one of my brothers sort of came in and started watching it, and he said, "Yeah, you see, this is when Doctor Who was really good," and at a time when people were sort of still sort of were starting to look at older stuff and mocking it. That was a real. That was a real affirmation. Oh my, but more Egyptian or pretend Egyptian. It just works, and all of this imagery, and it's an excellent design from Christine Rusco. But then, a few years, not long after that, I had some mates around. We had a party. We had probably 6 or 7 of my closest friends from fifth form. No, it was sixth form college. And we had a boozy night, and then I did what I do is I put a bit of Doctor Who on the next day, because it was my mission to transform everybody into a Doctor Who fan. It was my dream for my friends to go, "Toby, you're right. This is the best program ever. Tell me about the history of the Time Lords." And I remember them watching this, and with my brother's words echoing, ringing in my ears. This is good Doctor Who. They laughed at the mummies. They thought Peter Copley was a bad actor, and I realised that even my closest friends would never quite understand me. And they were all drama students as well, so it made me. It made me worried for the future. I suddenly realised that not everybody saw things through the same things that were absolutely clear as a bell to me. That Peter Copley is a great character actor, and that those mummies are scary, and a great rendition of fear placed very effectively and well designed into a children's adventure serial with just the right level of plausibility and menace. And they just thought it was rubbish. Tom Baker is at the height of his powers in this. and he's quite horrible, and he's quite alien, and yet he's radio emissions from the stars, and he's an alien. Tom Baker's Doctor is an alien, and I love that sort of sense of vague quiet amusement he gives to it. I assure you don't, but it's very nice of you to try. I mean, I could just spend all day saying how much I love Tom Baker, and this isn't nostalgia on my part, because, as I say, my initial memories of Doctor Who come from after this. So the Doctor I remember really is from season 17 and season 18, but it was just a joy to go back and to discover just how much detail he brings to it, just how interesting an actor is, just how committed he is to driving the drama, keeping the character flowing. And poor old Lawrence Garman, the way he fans it with his hat. And this costume is brilliant, because it's a wacky costume without being wacky. It's a costume nobody else but him would wear, but that actually fits in with wherever he lands. You know, he's not like Colin Baker or even Sylvester, whose costumes I think are a little just self-consciously wacky. Sylvester's gets better when he sort of tones it down and wears the duffel coat and things like that, but it's still a costume. I sort of buy what Tom Baker wears as clothes, and I certainly think, you know, it's always better when the Doctor retains a silhouette, but doesn't wear the same thing week in, week out. You know, it's not unlike poor old Peter Davison, whose costume is excellent. It's an excellent design, but it's a costume that rarely changes. And isn't that? I mean, that's very sweet that poor old Lawrence Garman has this machine that he's made that's brilliant, because he's invented the radio telescope, hasn't he? So he's really ahead of his time. I don't think that not enough attention is given to that. That actually the world, because of the events of Pyramids of Mars, is denied a technological wizard. Who gets treated fairly abominably throughout. Beware Sutekh. I mean, even with 2 words, Tom Baker can convey the magnitude of the danger, can't he? And Sarah, and I love that Sarah, you buy that Sarah knows this. I don't know why Sarah is a journalist in her particular field, but we buy it. We buy it because there's no reason why she shouldn't either. And it just takes for granted. It doesn't feel the need for her to go, I once did a story about Egyptian mums. You just take it. She's intelligent enough and she's game enough that we go, no, she's found that out at some time, and which means that she can contribute to the adventure. Not because this is a particular specialism, but because she's... and that bit's not on the VHS. But because she's a... she's a useful contributor to the drama. Just the organ. I mean, it's a great idea, isn't it? Because somebody playing an organ brings in aspects of, the Phantom of the Opera, and it helps with the soundtrack. But I love that it's the playing of the organ that summons the servant of Sutekh, because it's a useful device, not just. It could have been anything, but it just helps with the atmosphere and the telling of the story and what they're trying to achieve with it. And it's great because mummies are scary, but having a mummy as the main protagonist is tricky because mummies don't speak and all of that sort of thing. And they go, well, no, we'll have them as sort of background robot, basically the killers, the guard dogs, but let's make them mummies. And this is a great, very short-lived costume. And a reminder that when he starts speaking that actually Bernard Archard, to all intents and purposes, you sort of go that he must have, when he got the scripts, they must have put a little post-it note on the front saying, just read beyond episode 1 because you're not dead. I think, oh my God, the fact that he burns footsteps into the carpet is just everybody at the top of their game going, well, just this addition of smoke. Smoke is fairly simple, but they've gone, yeah, but actually let's have a bit of smoke, but let's have it burn the carpet. I mean, you see the footprints in later. I don't know if you can really see that but you can, because I believe it, whether they did or not. I think they did. Yeah, you can see that. But he's burnt holes in the carpet, which means what the hell is he going to do to this guy? And Naaman has been the main baddie, and it's a really good performance. And you think, well, he's going to be around for a bit. Oh no, then who the hell is this guy? And this is such a good cliffhanger. The burning, the screaming, the line, the cut back to the Doctor and co looking. It's horrible and brilliant and terrifying and pitch perfect and done by everybody. And I was going to choose as my favourite thing Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen's dynamic / the maudlin universal Doctor, which I might have to choose as my thing for the whole thing. We'll see what happens when we get to episode 4, because I can't not choose that cliffhanger. It's amazing. It's one of the best cliffhangers in the history of the show. I think it's a work of art. I think it's glorious. Well done, Paddy Russell. Oh, she was good, and didn't get on with Tom at all, and Tom did not get on with her, which is something I'm sure I will rattle on about in subsequent episodes. So, hoping that Richard, a reminder for casual listeners, I have to choose a favourite thing. If I choose the same thing as my guest, I get a point. If they choose something I don't choose, they get the point. However, if I choose something now that they choose in a later episode, that's in the bag for me because I'm at such a disadvantage. So if I was to choose, say, Tom Baker's hat this episode and Richard chose it for episode 3, I'd still get the point for that. However, of course, by choosing the cliffhanger, that can only be chosen now. So that's the risk I take, because I think, well, it's really good. The Tom Baker Elizabeth Sladen dynamic, I could pick for any episode, or I could pick for my bonus thing when we do part 4, and I have to choose a thing from part 4 and a bonus thing. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship going on here, but I think that cliffhanger is one of the greatest Doctor Who cliffhangers of all time. And so I'm hoping that Richard has chosen it. Shall we find out, everybody, what Richard Bignell, Doctor Who researcher extraordinaire, has chosen as his favourite thing of part 1 of Pyramids of Mars?
So, that was part 1. Now, what did I choose for my favourite thing in this particular episode? Well, I'm actually going to go with an aspect that could quite possibly be overlooked due to the sheer volume of this person's contribution to Doctor Who. So I'm going to choose Dudley Simpson's music for Pyramids of Mars.
It is very good.
Now, Dudley always said that this was one of his best scores, and I think I'd probably agree with him. What he was able to achieve with just a tiny group of usually 5 or 6 musicians was often quite astounding. And that really comes to the fore with this particular story. You get Simpson's wonderful scene-setting Egyptian music, along with some beautiful themes accompanying various characters throughout the story that are often quite surprisingly subtle in places where you might conventionally expect the opposite. And Dudley could be really subtle with his music. We're on a couple of years, and the very first episode of Image of the Fendal, for instance, only has 18 seconds worth of music. Dudley lets the stillness and the quietness of the wood and the priory ramp up the unease and the tension. In Pyramids, the later pursuit of Ernie Clements, which you might expect to be accompanied by some sort of frantic chase music, is actually scored with anything but. But then there's also that superbly mad and discordant organ music that Naaman plays in the Priory. And I love the fact that as the cover of the sarcophagus melts away to reveal the vortex behind, we still hear the music magically playing as he rises up and walks away from the organ.
Oh, yeah, not just a good choice, but a good explanation and a few facts in there as well. 18 seconds music in Image of the Fendal, that's something to watch out for. And there's barely any in episode 1 of Death to the Daleks either, is there? And yes, indeed, a small number of musicians. I always thought that the music playing was because it was a sign that the thing was coming through when the organ started playing itself. But maybe I just made that up in my head. I like my suggestion. I also like the suggestion that it's the incidental music picking up from where Narmin left off. You can choose either of those things. Either work, and the music helps. But what Richard didn't mention that I did during that was that rattlesnake music during the chase. That very bare minimalist stuff, which is really, really effective. Yeah, Dudley Simpson, good choice, but I couldn't not mention that cliffhanger. Well, look, thanks to Richard. So he's one up on me, and it means because some of you might have been thinking, well, hang on, Toby, if you choose something for episode 1 and he chooses it for episode 3, you get the point. How's that? Well, because also it means I now can't choose Dudley Simpson because it's been taken. So that's why. I mean, right to the ombudsman if you don't like the point system. Thanks to Richard. Do check out his work. He does the Now and Then documentaries. His Doctor Who Location book is absolutely fantastic. But just if you see him online anywhere, follow him on Nothing at the End of the Lane. Just tip your hat to him, give him a thanks, because honestly, the scholastic world of Doctor Who would be not quite so learned without his distinguished and fastidious research. And he's not one to blow his own trumpet, or indeed play his own organ. That sentence went to a place I'm not quite sure it could have done. Oh dear. Well, I bring Toby's gift. I think Toby's gift of double entendre to all humanity. Not quite the same as the ending to episode 1 of Pyramids of Mars, but my own version. Thanks so much for listening. God, I love this story. Richard Bignell is a great researcher for Doctor Who, if you've seen any of the DVDs and Blu-rays, then you have benefited from his fastidious research. He's also a top fellow. But he's one ahead of me because he chose Dudley Simpson's music last week, and I chose the cliffhanger that we're about to see repeated before we get into the action of episode 2 of this most wonderful slice of Doctor Who. I hope Egyptian Gothic is to your taste, because we're about to get another serving as we press play in 3, 2, 1. So it's still a bit of a treat for me to watch this in episode form, because I only, as I say, I did for those Sunday repeats, but something happened to part 4, and I think because I was a bit annoyed because I'd not paid such close attention, I think, because life was happening and I had Doctor Who and I'd got the edited version anyway, and it was only afterwards that I thought, but yeah, I didn't have it in episode form, and in the olden days I would have got a brand new videotape and I would have made sure I preserved it forever, because I used to sometimes fantasize and think, well, what if everybody they lost every episode of Doctor Who at the BBC? My tapes might be all that's left. But I had other distractions, and so then afterwards, I was annoyed I hadn't paid proper attention, so I didn't even really watch the first 3 episodes because it was a sort of reminder that I'd messed up. So it was only when I got this on DVD, which is the DVD I'm watching now, that I've had for years and years. So beautiful death. Goodbye to Peter Mayock, who played Narmin so well. He comes back in The Deadly Assassin, unrecognisable without the beard or the hair, as a guard that's been taken over by the Master that tries to interfere with the work of Coordinator Engin and Castellan Spandrel in episode 3 of The Deadly Assassin, Solis the Guard, and thereafter sort of disappears from the world of Doctor Who, having done 2 in close proximity, not for the same director. Interesting. He just sort of was around and wasn't doing an awful lot of other telly, which is interesting. And I think everyone presumed he was around, and then when they were researching the DVD, they thought, let's interview this guy, and they found out that he'd passed away, sadly, so relatively young. Don't know that much about him beyond that, apart from that he was an Irish stage actor. So I like these mummies. One of them is the main mummy is a guy called Nick Burnell, who had a very decent career. And Nick, I did a commentary with him for Phantom Films on this, and he passed away shortly after. Sadly, he was a nice man, but he played Patrick Cargill in a play about Tony Hancock that had Alfred Molina in. Was it called Hancock's Last Half Hour? That might not be the title. Google it. And he was in a low. He was in all sorts. He had a decent career, but this was one of his first jobs. But yeah, he's gone now. But the other two mummies are Melvin Bedford, who pops up again for a different director in a small part in Planet of Evil, and Kevin Selway, who I would have known nothing about were it not for the fact that somebody who I'm in touch with on Facebook or Twitter shared a hospital ward with him, and they got chatting, and he was a guy who was in Doctor Who. So isn't that funny? I'm not taking you to an awful hospital ward where nobody got out. It was they were in hospital, and they've since left, and everybody's fine. But when this was out on DVD, that Peter Mayock being no longer with us was an unusual thing for this cast. So you've got interviews with Michael Sheard and Bernard Archard and Peter Copley. And aren't we lucky that the DVD started when they did, because there are so many of those guys now no longer with us. Tom Baker acts that stuff very well. It's not the best rendered of the scenes in this production, and it's telling that there's actually nothing wrong with it, but it still sticks out as a sort of one of the sort of subpar moments because it's such a good production. Oh, and Shirley has come through the door. And this is George Tovey. Are you in for good now? I can stop.
I'm coming and getting this when you go to.
Okay. This is George Tovey as Ernie Clements, the poacher, who, when watching the VHS, you don't realise he's actually only in this episode, and doesn't meet anybody else and dies. And he contributes. I was going to say he contributes nothing to the plot. That's not true, because he is there, and we use his explosives later on, so he's actually there for a purpose, but largely to die horribly before the episode is out. He's only on film, so he probably didn't do any rehearsals, but of course he has a connection with Doctor Who, literally with Doctor Who. I love that man trap. Looks horrible, doesn't it? And I'd also say that's quite an extreme thing for a poacher to have, and you're right for being sued if you leave one of those lying around. But that's gonna chop any poor rabbit in half, isn't it? But that's great because it shows the strength of the mummy and it gives him something to be scared of. But he literally has a connection with Doctor Who because George Tovey, is, well, you know from the surname, he is the father of Roberta Tovey, who plays Susan in the Dalek movies. Apologies for that interruption. That was my other half, Shirley, coming in, and I don't like to break up the edits of these things if I possibly can, so you just got a little bit of a view into life in Hadoke Towers there, where, yes, if my partner comes in when I'm recording a podcast, she has to sod off. Whereas Bernard, my dog, has currently got his nose in the compost bin. It's clean. Anyway, so it's all go here, and it's all go for poor old Ernie Clements, who George Tovey is in the first ever production of Harold Pinter's The Dumb Waiter as well. That's one of his pieces of theatrical history. But he's good casting as he's got a great face, hasn't he? You can imagine him rolling up a fag and sitting on a tree stump, and but he's he doesn't get much to say. He's probably only got does he say about 6 words? He says Holy Moses, doesn't he? Professor Scarman, murdering swine. I don't think any of his lines are more than 2 lines. But he gets, if you can hear a noise now, Bernard is deciding to rub himself against the carpet and having a bit of a roll around and an argument with nothing. I'm sorry, this is normally this is recorded under the most professional of conditions, i.e. when everyone's asleep. I love that simple little effect of Holy Moses. Throwing not too much attention is drawn to it, and I find that happens quite a lot in this era, whereas they'll have moments that are really good and really well rendered, but instead of drawing too much attention to it, going, oh, look at that, it's so seamlessly melded into it that you go, oh, and it's only afterwards that you think, oh, how did they do that. Wow, I didn't see the joins, and it's remarkable how little Peter Copley's in it actually as well. I mean, it's a beautiful. I used to love watching stuff like this as a kid. All the films I remember as a kid were things like The Great Escape or The Poseidon Adventure, which were all about, even though they had different trappings and different settings, that the thrust of the drama was a group of people in a perilous situation, and some of them die. And so you get moments of high drama, i.e. the death of somebody, that punctuate it every now and again. And part of the fun, if fun is the word, is working out, who's gonna buy it next. So we've had Collins. He came in and was the lovely butler, dead. Dr. Warlock, who the whole of episode 1 is sort of almost about saving, who then the plot suddenly runs out of any use for. So he has a little bit of a kip, and now he gets murdered. And Peter Copley was an actor of repute and experience. So it's quite remarkable how small a part this is. But it's not a small part. It's a really decent part, and he plays it well. But he's got a great cameo in the first episode of Survivors as well, where he's sort of, he's deaf and he's old, and he says that brilliant line with great dignity, I won't make a very good survivor. And your heart breaks, and it's again that sort of stoical thing that we can do in the sort of drama and with the sort of actors that we have, or certainly had from this period. I noticed when Survivors was remade, you see, my drama school friends thought that was awful. I think that's absolutely fine, and I think because he moved his arm, and they're all, I thought his arm was hurt. And he said, why are you looking for stuff? And I think if you were imperiled, even if your arm was in a sling, you tense it. Do you know what I mean? And again, I think you have to be very ungenerous to sort of be. I don't know why people watch things to look for things that, if they gave them the benefit of the doubt, wouldn't take them out of the drama, but instead prefer to look for the thing that will take them out of the drama. What does that mean? You've got one up on the people making the fiction. You know that it's fiction. You pointing that out and sort of willfully, knocking the suspenders off your disbelief is nobody's. There's no victory there, or it's a hollow one. That said, I do wish that mummy was tucked in at the midriff. All it'd take a bit of bandage round. There's me doing so what was I to? Oh yes, in the Survivors, when they remade it, that scene where an old man goes, well, I don't know even how to make a candle, and that line, I won't make a very good survivor. The parallel character was an outward bound guy played by a good friend of mine, Francis McGee, who basically went, oh yeah, I've got a tent and I can live off the land. This Holocaust won't make much difference to me. And you go, talk about undermining the very series that you've created by having a character go, yeah, I'll be fine. You go, what? That's completely not the message that you want to be conveying to the audience. You want to be going, this is awful. How will we people that have become so reliant on technology cope with even the basics and the most fundamentals? So you go, here's an outward bound guy who's just going to live in a tent, he'll be all right. I mean, cloth-eared. But don't get me started. Well, you just have. Tom Baker's very, very an etheric impulse. He does all the sort of scientific mumbo jumbo with such conviction, and they manage to make the words, I don't know, somehow trip off his tongue as well. Holmes has such a good ear for the sort of the language of melodrama, so that it all sounds great and real. See, these ones they're tucked in. They're not coming loose at the. That last one is a little bit. Oh, and we haven't even mentioned the brilliant Bernard Archard. Oh, poor old Peter Mayock gets to play a corpse this week. There are very few. They're a bit untucked at the back. There are a few actors that die at the end of episode 1. I can think of Martin Court in The Seeds of Death. Nick Zaran, he's at the end of episode 4, I think. I've mentioned this in the Seeds of Death podcast. In The Space Pirates, who die at the end of episode 1 and come back as a corpse. Sometimes people get replaced. Bernard Holly at the end of Tomb of the Cybermen 1. But sometimes, like at Balan in The Dominators, they actually replace the actor, having done the cliffhanger, so they don't have to pay him. I love this bit. I used to... And look at Tom Baker's face. He's so good. That anger, that danger. But I love this relatively... You know how they do it. And that's why he's walking a bit funny, is because he's walked backwards and turned around, and they've discharged the shot. But it's so well done, and it's sort of simple, but it's not, because it's seamless, and again, it's done without too much fanfare. It's just like, this is the sort of thing that happens, and it's a clever cut from the film of George Tovey to the studio exterior, if you like, of the shattered glass and that wonderful cadaverous face of Bernard Archer, who is so coldly menacing. Oh, the holes. That's the first time I have noticed that the jacket doesn't have it. Oh no, because the hole closed up. Yeah, no, that's fine. See, I'm the ghosts of my old sixth form college friends are dancing in my memories. I love that bit where the effect of the shotgun going back in. It's not just that this is a good. They talk about Paddy Russell being an actor's director, and the acting is flawless in this. I also think it's a brilliantly designed show. I think Christine Rusco has done a fantastic job. But it's the sort of stuff that the BBC does very well. But the merging of the sort of futuristic and the ancient Gothic and the historical setting. It's almost 3 different time zones, really, even though the mummies sort of represent even 2, because they're futuristic, but they're also from the past, and they're from the past even in this setting that we're in the past in, if you get my drift. And it all merges together so well. So there's incongruity, but a bit like the Doctor's costume, it all is of the same universe. It all somehow sort of fits. And I mean, it's like the Web of Fear, which I have invoked. What Pyramids of Mars is about doesn't actually stand that much scrutiny, but I couldn't give 2 hoots because it's done with such conviction. And I think sometimes, the great trick of Doctor Who is to paper over the cracks, and I think much like some modern politicians have realised, we don't have to pretend we're nice. Let's just be horrible, and people will forgive us if they like the cut of our jib. I think this story doesn't go to great lengths in terms of its story and its and the script to hide the fact that it doesn't bear much scrutiny in terms of the plot, but it trusts the way that it tells its story, that we don't really think about the fact of going, well, this seems a very... how come he's got all the bits to build the rocket, and if he can give them the bits to build the rocket, how come he can't... Anyway, it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't really matter, because you follow these 2 characters so willingly, and you buy into the production 100% because of the quality of both. And this is it's funny. This bit, I know Russell T Davies was going to have an element of this, or was going to actually replicate this scene in one of his episodes in the first year when he brought Doctor Who back. It's seen as a key moment. It was. It's funny because I never sort of needed it. I just took on trust that, if where they are now dies, that wipes everything out. So but I know, people view this scene as very important, and it is, and it's very, very well done. And I love that model work. Is that this period of Doctor Who even has, for just a split second moment like that, it's really well rendered. The CSO is very good. The model is very good. I'm from 1980. Let's not even get started on the whole 1980 business. But it's just for the questioning audience. It's a very clever way of just going, so don't ask that question again. So I suppose in 12 years into the show to go, it's just by the way, in case you were wondering. And then if anybody asks later, they can go, oh no, there was an episode back in 1975 where they got that covered. So it's, I suppose it's useful. But, time travel, it's helpful if you don't think about it too much. Again, just go with the adventure. We could have, we could spend ages sitting around and explaining a reason why. But should we not just get on with the adventure? So actually, that's a very economical and useful sort of stopgap just to go, in case you were wavering. I think that's a brilliant shot of those two mummies. And poor old Ernie Clements. But this, I remember my school friends hooting at this because I don't know. I think the gate is good. And bless them, because that's hard terrain and they can't really see. He nearly goes over then, but they're sort of in sync as well, and that's hard to do in a big mummy costume on a sort of incline like that, on probably fairly bumpy terrain. And I think they're a great image. And he's going to bang into the wall, poor guy. And it's, they're inexorable, these guys. This is proper terrifying tea time stuff. And it's the mixture of past and futuristic that I think that Doctor Who does so well. It's the mixture of science fiction and gothic horror that Doctor Who does so well. And look, this is summer. This is bright. This isn't darkness. This isn't moonlit, which would be so expensive and hard to do. And yet it's still terribly creepy and terribly scary. It's sort of counterintuitive. It goes against what you imagine, how you imagine these things should be done. And I'm sure if you were doing a lot of this now, you would set it at night. But it works. Now I'm sure Gabriel Wolfe wasn't actually supposed to be in this episode. He's not credited. I'm certain of that. This is where I might end up with egg on my face. I've got a feeling, did they bring this scene forward because this episode was underrunning? That's something for you to do for your homework at home. But I'm sure, because I remember, again, when I saw this in episodical form, go, why isn't Sutek credited? Because he's definitely in it. But but then what happened in between the Doctor and Co going out of the window and us coming here? There must have been a bit in between, maybe a bit of Clements. Anyway, that's something for you to do for your homework. This is not 100% factual. This is me off the top of my head, because if I had to research every podcast I did, I would do nothing else, not even breathe. And I'm sure some of you would find that preferable. But there we go. I've listened to some podcasts where there's all sorts of conjecture that if they just looked in a book, they'd realise was wrong. So I'm making no apology. I think something of what I said there was accurate. And if it means that you go and look it up and you learn something, then good for you. If it means you already knew it and you're going, I know something he doesn't, that's a victory that you will enjoy as well. So everybody wins. Michael Sheard is so easy to underestimate because he was ubiquitous in it and sort of became a bit of a joke. I remember SFX magazines, very friendlily taking the mickey out of the fact that they'd list all the guests at all the conventions that month, and Michael Sheard went to all of them because he was very enthusiastic and a very, very nice guy. And I think that's the danger, because when you become so ubiquitous and familiar to fans, I think sometimes we can then lose sight of why we like them in the first place. And it's almost like we respect you more, which is why, certain actors who regulate their appearances, it's part of Peter Kay, the comedian's appeal, is that he knows that people can get sick of you. So he very much chooses his moments. Whereas Michael Sheard chose every moment to go to every convention if he could. And look at that cutaway shot of him hearing, he's the traditional, helpful associate character, except Doctor Who's really horrible to him and gets quite annoyed by him, and he dies, which you know, and in a lot of stories, his character he would survive. Clemence's death is quite. I remember this being written about as you know, pretty startling. You know, he's crushed to death between the mummy's tits. But again, my friends found that silly, and in fact, I think my sister watched it with me once, and she said, "Oh, did he die because you hear the gunshot, and then, you know, he falls for, oh, did he get shot then?" So, and I'm going, no, it's a gruesome moment where he gets crushed to death. So, having read about it as this, you know, great scary moment, other people witnessing it was always a bit of a disappointment to me. But it's a pretty grim death, isn't it? And they do it as, you know, they do as much with it as you can at a Saturday tea time. She holds that quite a long time because, of course, I'm not used to the cliffhangers. Well done. She kept acting. You'd cut away from that slightly quicker, I'd say, these days. But yeah, the crushing. So Ernie Clements, bless him, doesn't meet anybody else and just spends the whole thing being chased or in trouble or banging into a force field. But I remember he's much higher on the credits on the VHS compilation. He's bottom, because of course Sutek does not get a credit. I was right. See, I haven't even seen that much, that much, but I knew Sutek wasn't credited on episode 2. But George Tovey is credited, I think, third after Archer and Sheard on the VHS compilation, whereas he's actually near the bottom there because it's a very, very small part. Anyway, nobody cares about that apart from me. But yeah, he's that's bless him. That's his one contribution. Now listen, what's my favourite thing about that, and what will be Richard Bignell's favourite thing? Will he choose the Ernie Clements subplot, which serves, you know, it absolutely works for all the short screen time that we spend with him. You know, he provides us with the person whose explosives are going to be used in the next episode. He shows us that you can't escape. By the way, I haven't even talked about that. The fact that, brilliant, we're all enclosed in this particular space. So, you know, we can't get away even if we wanted to, except to 1980, which has been destroyed because we haven't done the business here. So that's a really good way of saying, you know, you got to stay here and possibly die or die. And he does that brilliant bit to show that Marcus Scarman can't be killed, and then he adds to the list of casualties. Brilliant. So I wonder if Richard will choose that, but I think I would be untrue to myself if I didn't choose the bit where Marcus Scarman is shot and then the smoke comes back into him, and, you know, the explosion is undone, because I just think it's emblematic of the whole story, whereas it's a brilliantly staged moment that is done with skill, economy, very little fanfare, and just fits seamlessly into the rest of it, and it's just, you know, a mark of its quality. And I just remember as a kid thinking these are the moments that make Doctor Who really exciting, and I still think it's, you know, it's pretty good for now. So I'm choosing the bit where Ernie Clements shoots Professor Scarman and the effect is reversed. So, what will Richard Bignell?
Now, I have to admit, part 2 was something of a tough one for me, because there were several different things that I could have picked for this episode. But my choice this time are the mummies themselves. So, why have I chosen them? Well, first off, I think the mummies are a terrific design. They echo what had been seen in the old Universal and Hammer mummy films, whilst absolutely providing their own take on the creature. But the main reason I've chosen them for this episode is one particular factor, and this is something that has really stuck with me ever since I saw the story over 45 years ago. I love the fact that they are slow moving. You see, throughout Doctor Who's history, you've had a myriad of monsters and creatures that haven't exactly been the quickest to get from A to B. But more often than not, that's been about necessity rather than design. I guess if you encase a man in thick rubber and fiberglass and then reduce his vision down to absolutely nothing, it's hardly surprising that the jobbing actor inside won't be pacing along at a rate of knots. Or in the case of Mestor, not at all. But with the mummies, however, their slow speed appears to have been a deliberate decision. The script actually refers to them as lumbering when they move. And that's exactly what we see with their pursuit of poor Ernie Clements in this episode. These creatures don't need to move fast. They don't need speed. With their prey trapped within the confines of a force field and unable to escape, they just constantly pursue until they finally catch up with you. It rather reminds me of that line in the original Terminator film, where Carl Reese says to Sarah Connor, "That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it will absolutely not stop ever until you are dead." In fact, in my mind, this is probably an idea that hasn't really been played out again in Doctor Who until 2015 and the Peter Capaldi story, Heaven Sent, where, of course, the Doctor's trapped in this ever-changing castle in the sea, being slowly but continually pursued by this mysterious, tall, shrouded figure that is simply called the Veil in the closing credits. Funnily enough, though, it also reminds me of the BBC sketch show Big Train from around the early 2000s. I think it was in the second series of that in one edition they had this running gag about Kevin Eldon being pursued by Mark Heap dressed as the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. And every so often we would cut back to Eldon's character getting more and more panicked as he tried to flee the Tin Man, who was slowly but unstoppingly pursuing him with this constant, repetitive, menacing music playing in the background as he made his way up the road. Back in 1975, I found the mummies catching up with Ernie and then crushing him to death as they body slammed each other against their angled chest. Absolutely horrifying. And then, of course, the gun goes off and the mummies pursue the Doctor, Sarah and Lawrence Scarman back to his lodge, where they are trapped in a terrifying cliffhanger. Now, of course, the mummy service robots run throughout this story, but it's really in part 2 where they really come to the fore. And that is why they are my favourite aspect of this particular episode.
Oh, he's good, isn't he? He's really thought about this. And of course he can absolutely quote accurately Michael Bihn's speech from the Terminator. Of course he can. And then cross-reference it with Big Train. This guy knows what he's talking about. He's right about the mummies. And of course they kill Ernie Clements just before the end of episode 2, so he doesn't have to get paid for another episode. And we don't see his corpse later on, unlike Narmin's. Yeah, and I think, he's right about the mummies, and I hadn't thought about that, the slow, inexorable thing. And of course, because we're surrounded by a force field, it doesn't matter if they're slow, because they won't tire, and we've got limited places to go. They are a really good design, and I love that Target book cover, the original one that has it as the central image with the Doctor and with Sarah with the gun. That that was the stuff that you looked at and went, this is when Doctor was really grown up, and it is grown up for tea time melodrama adventure. It's there's nothing phony about it. It's it's staged with absolute commitment, and that includes the design of the mummies. It's a really good design. It's a really good costume design, even though they have tits. But that works. But it also means I can say, Richard was much better. He said they body slam and crush him, whereas I said he was crushed by their tits. But it's the same thing, but with a different approach. But I wonder, I probably would have chosen them if I didn't have the spectre of my old college friends, saying, it's like when I was doing the Choose Your Own Adventures by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, Fighting Fantasy. And I got really into those. And I remember saying to my brother, it's great because you choose which way you go. And, if you choose the wrong way, you die and then you have to start again. He said, well, why would you start again? Why didn't you just go back to the bit where you made the wrong decision and carry on from there? And that had not occurred to me. And it was like Santa Claus all over. It absolutely ruined it for me. And I think in a bit in that way of having had this on after a party with my, 17, 18-year-old friends. 17 we were, 16, 17. And then seeing flaws in it that just hadn't occurred to me, that I was blind to. That even though I didn't agree with them, it just slightly sullied them. Even though I think they're great and I think my friends were wrong. But I still cannot escape that association, that stinging disappointment. Other people, they ruin everything, don't they? And with that in mind, I'm going to end this episode and go onto Twitter to see what folk have made of the latest Doctor Who DVD and Blu-ray releases. What could possibly go wrong? I know that Richard Bignell, my guest, will have some excellent thoughts and choices for part 3, which, as I remember, is an episode I'm going to be spoilt for choice with. But let's see what happens. Welcome, thanks for listening. I'm recording this the day after Doctor Who's birthday. I didn't get much to do Doctor Who-y, 58th birthday, because these are released with quite a gap. If you're not a patron. If you are a patron, it's frighteningly close because I'm running out of content. So that's the difference between patronage and non-patronage. 1, you get it by the skin of my teeth, and 2, you get it probably could even be after I've died. But no, as I record this, but it's not topical, so it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go, oh, Marcus Scarman is as mean as the current Home Secretary, Priti Patel. And then by the time you get to this, there's been another 3. Well, we can but hope. Sorry, I don't normally do politics, but I think she's quite grotty. Now, I do politics. I'm very political, but not in Doctor Who podcasts because it can distract us from what we're about, which is about celebrating Doctor Who. I'm not really actually that cheerful or positive a person either. So I'm doing that for these podcasts too. But anyway, let's not get bogged down in all of that. Part 3 of Pyramids of Mars, which Richard Bignell is going to choose his thing at the end of this episode. And I'm on episode selection on the DVD of Pyramids of Mars. Well, by the time you get this, it's probably going to be available in microchip form. But for now, I want you to press enter in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, it's a great story, this, isn't it? Pyramids. It's, although I'm going to let you into a little secret, I'm slightly worried about what happens when we get to episode 4 for reasons I will explain during episode 4, which is probably one of my least watched in its proper form episodes ever of Doctor Who. I think I've illuminated you on that in episode 1 when talking about how I acquired it and my main watching of it. Stephen Harris, of course, does not exist. I know a couple of Steve Harrises. I don't think I've even mentioned Sarah's costume, have I? Which is terrific. And good job she was wearing it, considering when they landed. And have I talked about the mummies? Nick Burnell, the leader mummy, sadly died relatively recently and had a good career. He played Patrick Cargill opposite Alfred Molina's Tony Hancock. I may have mentioned this in episode 1. I can't remember. This is the problem when I take a break. Kevin Selway was in hospital with a Facebook friend of mine, and Melvin Bedford. Yeah, I think I have mentioned this. It's okay. We're warming up. Tom Baker is waspish in this. Animated human cadaver. I love that dialogue. But and credit to Michael Sheard, because he's contrite and he's nervy, but he's not a coward, and he's he's not annoying, because these characters are sometimes, and it's funny because I remember when we had the book and my brothers talked about, you know, the Doctor helped by Lawrence Scarman and all that sort of thing. I remember it being a real shock in my childhood to discover that Lawrence Scarman, who I thought was the sort of main good guy, died. As that seemed to me a thing that didn't happen in Doctor Who. I was obviously less experienced of the show. And Gabriel Wolfe, he does so much whilst sitting in a chair, and he's quite sweet in the making of this, isn't he? Which I haven't seen for years, but I remember him saying, "Well, I thought everybody would just, I thought Bernard Archard was the main thing that everyone would like." And actually, Bernard Archard is superb. And when I first, watched this and had this on VHS, it was definitely Bernard Archard's performance as the animated human cadaver. He seems to take that as his cue. Is a really good piece of work, and he was cropping up as the pathologist in Bergerac. I remember being quite pleased to see him, and in fact I actually taped little clips of Bergerac because he was popping up in it, and I like to have clips of Doctor Who actors in other programmes because I didn't have that much Doctor Who, so I would watch these sort of just bits of Bergerac with Bernard Archard and Ian Marter, or Forever Green with John Abineri, and just watch those, and it would be like, well, I suppose it's quite close to watching Doctor Who. God, the things we did. I mean, this will sound like gobbledygook to anybody from the modern era where things are just... I wonder where those two lads are who are stand-in for Lawrence and Marcus in the photo. Probably long dead. If not, I shall interview them. I assume it's just a stock photo. They might even have been long dead then. Yeah, Bernard Archard, very good. I wrote to Bernard Archard and was surprised to get a letter back. I think because he always played these sort of stony-faced, big-jawed... Well, that's because that's what he looked like. But if they weren't villains, they were quite sardonic characters. And I saw him very much as a heavyweight actor. I thought, well, there's no way he'll write back to me, and he absolutely did. And he sent me a signed photo, but his photo was from the 60s. I don't know if that was the one he was hawking about to casting directors, but anyway... So I have a signed picture of Bernard Archard. It's quite surprised to discover his partner of many, many, many years actually was listed in, I think, last year's Equity Journal as being dead. James Belchamber, the actor. And they were long partners for, I think, 50 years. And did ultimately get a civil partnership when they were allowed. Oh, poor old Lawrence Scarman. He's and of course Michael Sheard was so well known to my generation as Mr. Bronson from Grange Hill, who was firm and stern and mean, and I think, as I think I've said before, we sometimes underestimate just what a good actor Sheard was, and he was almost too nice. He diluted his cachet by making himself too available. And also, he wrote about 73 volumes of autobiography, which I think is a trifle too many. The first one is very interesting. I mean, it's very lovely and conversational. Here's a tip. If you're writing a book, don't go, "Oh, I've just remembered. What's the name of that actor? I'll tell you what, I'll go and ask my wife. I've just popped downstairs and asked my wife, and we don't need any of that. We don't need, just say, I remember working with the actor, and say his name. I don't need to find out how you discovered his name. Maybe in a sort of rambling documentary where you're looking for something, but in a book, I don't need to see a process. This is a great episode, and it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because this is green and sunny and breezy, and yet there's a doom-laden atmosphere. It's partially because of Tom Baker's very highly charged with, dark star energy. And Elizabeth Sladen, even though she is, she is subtle, and she has these lovely little humorous little ticks that she does, she's taken it absolutely seriously. I mean, that shot of Tom Baker just in the hat looking up at the camera absolutely loves him. And I love the fact that she sort of she gives as good as she gets without it being a spike, without it being an annoying row, a bit like like Perry and the Sixth Doctor sometimes got a little bit too much sort of bickery. The Doctor's quite sort of terse and bullish with her, and she's like, yeah, all right, and she sort of dilutes it, but without sort of taking it on too much. It's a great dynamic. Hammer and chisel, one wrong move and you'll never know the time again. It's full of so many good lines, this. Stephen Harris, Robert Holmes. You sure did know how to write Doctor Who. And you know, that's a fairly straightforward video effect, but it doesn't look too hokey to me. Sometimes try and, but you know, this shot here, this stuff on film out here could be broadcast today, I think, with no you wouldn't change very much about it at all. Okay, there's the inside of a thermos flask, but that works for me as well. In fact, probably kids today don't know what the inside of a thermos flask. Oh, you've probably cancelled them. Sorry, I'm trying to be an edgelord. But no, you don't. You don't know what a thermos flask looks like. I shouldn't think young people. My children don't. They lecture me on world politics. Can they make a cup of coffee? I don't think so. Anyway, that's a story for another day. That's a delightful scene. You know, and I like the light on the sarcophagus, especially as it only sort of flickers across the blue stripes and not the grey ones. That's a neat effect. Yeah, that really works. I assume that's some sort of front axial projection, and it's working on the bit of the set that's painted that particular colour, which is I like effects that don't particularly draw attention to themselves until you, as I have done, then just think about it too hard. I don't think that's going, oh, look at this wild thing. It's just a nice piece of attention to detail. He's a very memorable villain for one that's in 2 and a bit episodes, who largely sits on a chair. He's a wonderful. All life is my NAA. All life shall under the reign of Sutek the Destroyer. It's great, isn't it? And I love that speech, but there is something about the addition of the word fish. I don't know, and it's perfectly right. Why shouldn't he say that? But I do sort of think, yeah, animals, reptiles, fish. What fish done to? And I don't know why I select fish for. It's just quite a funny word, isn't it? Fish in that context, in a way that the other words aren't. But fish slightly undermines it for me. It doesn't. I still think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's superbly delivered, and it's a glorious summation of the character and what a force for evil he is. But it's just something about the word fish. But it's a great speech. I was fortunate enough to interview Gabriel Woolf on stage for. I love their banter in this scene. For the 50th anniversary. I think I got. Did I have Gabriel Woolf? No, because I had Julian Glover, Michael Kilgariff, and Stephen Thorne. But I did have Gabriel Woolf too. Maybe I had the 4 of them. And he did that, so he got out his bit of paper and did that speech. And I had a little chat with him afterwards as well, when he was reading his book. And he was very nice, and he's got a wonderful voice. He's married to a dame, an opera singer. I love this. Sweaty. I don't know anything about Gelignite and Sweaty Gelignite, but Tom Baker, I think Terence Dix slightly explains it in the book. He goes, Gelignite, when it's been da-da-da, is sometimes called sweaty, and then but they don't worry about doing that here. I love, and it's a beautiful shot. She's towering above him, just looking gorgeous. Oh, and then she does the sneeze, and he does the look, and it's not a sort of hokey, out of place. Sometimes a sort of comedy moment in a bit of sci-fi, especially at the end of an episode, you're like, oh, come on, that's a bit hokey. But that's totally organic. It's part of their relationship. She knows what she's doing when she says that line. He knows what he's doing when he reacts like that. He sort of knows that he's being a bit of a sourpuss, and it's really, really layered. And they don't have to point that out to us. It's just clear in the chemistry. Oh God, does it happen this soon? Oh, so you've just had that lovely bit of sort of unforced, natural comedy repartee between the Doctor and Sarah in a scene that I used to play over there. I used to love. God, I used to watch this all the time, the VHS. And then the camera zooms in, doesn't it? Yeah. Kudos to Paddy Russell, by the way, the atmosphere that she infuses this with, and the space that she gives her actors. And this is, and look, and the lovely makeup on Bernard Archard. He's got a slightly a sort of silvery sheen, to suggest the sort of the dead flesh, the putrefaction held at bay, but it's still sort of icy. It's like living rigor mortis, if you like, and the red eyes. It's a very subtle makeup job, but it does the job. It's there's a cold, clammy deathness to him, and he's got a brilliant face anyway. Look at those lines under his eyes and around his, he's that granite jaw that he's got. And this is a brilliant scene. Two guest actors absolutely selling it. And it's not what you normally get. You don't do this at drama school. A sad brother trying to talk the corpse of his other brother out of malfeasance, and he's not too whimpering or cowardly. He's trying his best, Sheard. I think it's a really lovely performance from Michael Sheard. Oh, and you don't see the smoke here or anything. It's just you don't actually need it. It's all in the acting. I took an off-screen photo of this. Please. Oh, it's so horrible. And that's the last we see of Lawrence, who, looked like he was going to be, especially when he was sort of bounding about the TARDIS with that sort of public schoolboy, burpy laugh that he did, because he was so excited by the time machine. And let's not forget, he invented the electromagnetic telescope, how many ever years early it was. So, he could have been, the stuff of legend, and instead he sort of dies a rather sad death at the hands of the brother that he refused to accept was dead. He did outlive his brother, really, but had the rather unsatisfying coda of seeing the corpse of his brother he outlived walking around killing his friends. Oh, it's not a nice story, is it? That's a brilliant image. The three mummies outside the rocket. I mean, I don't really buy it as a rocket. It's a triangular tent, but it doesn't really matter because it's actually quite a nice design, and the whiteness offset against the sort of grey sentinels, the grey patchwork, mummified, quilted sentinels. Oh, bless him. And he's rocking away. And this is a grim scene as well, isn't it? Because she touches him and he falls off, doesn't he? He's dead. Yeah. Oh, and the way that the Doctor sort of recoils, it's not an emotional recoil. It's a sort of, oh, that's the dead thing. And he's got a grimness. He's not being unpleasant. He's about to get unpleasant though. Oh, that's so inhuman. And if another Doctor did that, I'm not sure I would let them get away with it. But Tom Baker he started the thing so maudlin with the walk in eternity. It's like he's carrying the weight. It's like he's like somebody's put a turd in Gordon Brown's Horlicks. I mean, he's got that sort of demeanour about him. And he's not being cruel here. He's not rubbing it in. He has the pragmatism of somebody that knows the vast scale of the potential death that's available. I prefer this to the scene where Jodie Whittaker's Doctor didn't know how to talk to a man that talked to her about cancer. Do you know what I mean? Because this seems to me to have more sort of doom-laden resonance about it, and it's there, and the point that it makes while it does it tells you something about the Doctor, and I know that other scene did that as well, but I just didn't think that one worked, whereas this one does, and Tom Baker's, the fact that you sort of sense that Tom Baker has heard the echoes of hell in his ears, and has had to learn to shut them out. And that he's troubled by it, but he's not gonna, he's never gonna share that. I'm not sure. I mean, it's one of the first things Doctor Who ever did, isn't it? Put Ian in the Dalek, which I'm not a great fan of, and we've had it recently with Peter Capaldi in Davros's chair, which I'm not a great fan of. And now we have Tom Baker dressed as the Mummy, which sort of emphasises that they're men in costumes, and they're such good costumes, and they've gone to such a length to not having an entirely human shape by having that sort of breastplate and the sunken eye bits, which of course Sarah has replicated. How has she done that? Well, because she's using the same costume that Nick Bonnell or Kevin Selway or whoever is wearing on Tom Baker. And I know that Tom Baker did not want to wear the mummy costume and presumably said, look, no, let one of these lads do it. And Paddy Russell said, nope, we'll be able to tell it's you, which is a sort of compliment, but I don't know if Tom wasn't after compliments. He was after not having to wear a mummy costume. So I know that was a bone of contention between them, and I suspect, and it seems that Paddy was not diplomatic in the way that Tom needed her to be. Love that, and I can feel, and the noise it makes, I can feel that burning my fingers. That's he must have asbestos fingertips. Well, no, of course not. He's a corpse, but I totally buy that, and I don't know if it burnt a hole in the carpet, but it gave me the impression that it did. Isn't smoke brilliant? That sort of smoke, dry ice smoke. I mean, it was just having that in a scene was exciting for me as a kid. And Sarah with the gun. This seems quite unlike Sarah to me. And I remember the image on the book, which I know is taken from a still, taken from the story, but the image on the book cover of her with the gun seemed really harsh, and it wasn't a particularly flattering picture of Sarah. I remember thinking, oh, she's not, I was very young. Sarah's not very pretty, whereas of course Sarah is extremely pretty. So it wasn't a great picture of her. And I remember looking at that and going, and my brother's going, yeah, we don't like Sarah. She screams all the time. She does not. But I was so in my head, implanted by my brothers and sister, that Sarah Jane was a bit naff because she screamed a lot. That, I remember not having particularly high hopes for Sarah when I started, discovering past Doctor Who, because that had been the lie that I had been sold. And so it was only after watching a couple of Elizabeth Sladen ones that I went, I think I've decided that my brothers and sister don't know what the hell they're talking about, and she is amazing. And I think she's rarely out of sync with what each scene needs. She turns her hand to everything. She does that light comedy. She does the banter. She does the keeping it serious. And now she's doing sort of gutsy. I don't buy the fact that Sarah is a crack shot, but I buy the fact that Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah in this scene is a crack shot, if that makes any sense. So she's been asked to do something that is slightly out of character, and I've got a hint of a feeling that she may have queried that as well. So I bet Paddy Russell had a slightly annoying day. Both of her leads querying. I could be wrong about the rifle, but they both. And it's interesting that even if they are doing something that they're not happy with, they both actually do it with absolutely the right level of intense drama. To make it work and to make it, and I didn't really query it first time around. It's only because I'm so familiar with this. I even love that shot, just the shot with the three mummies. I don't quite buy the Doctor as you would think that somehow Sutek and Marcus Scarman are in somehow mentally simpatico with their servitor robots, but okay, especially if he could do that. If in a split second he knows to hold an explosion, why doesn't he know they're over there? But anyway, it's fine. I'm thinking about it too much. It's just I think this did always slightly niggle me, and you can sort of tell it's Tom Baker. He does move a bit like Tom Baker. I think Paddy Russell had a point. I'm slightly annoyed with myself for using people's Christian names. I think if you're talking about a piece of work, you talk about Baker, you talk about Sladen, but and I write for Doctor Who magazine. I don't like Doctor Who magazine using people's Christian names when they're doing an interview or a review or whatever, because I think if you're writing a serious article, you need to be objective and you refer to people by their surnames. We're not a gang; they're not our mates. And when people refer to Pat, I don't know Patrick Troughton. He's Troughton. But this is just my own snobbery. I'm not saying I'm not going to be remotely consistent about this. But my feeling is I should always say the person's surname. But I have met some of these people. But none of them are my friends, so I should be able to. And as I say, when somebody calls Hartnell Bill, I think, what are you doing? He's Hartnell. But that's if they want to call him Bill because they consider him their friend, or because they want to call him Bill, they can, and it's none of my business, and I don't actually really care. But my preference is to do. I think that shot of Tom Baker isn't that on the back of an annual somewhere? That exactly the same angle as him moving through the sarcophagus. I don't know why I did that. It's just because I cringe a little bit. I know people listening back to this when they say I'm talking about Tom or whatever may make me sound quite sort of conceited and boastful, and I can understand that because I do think that when I hear people refer to somebody they don't really know who is their hero in a television program by their Christian name. But I have been lucky enough to do quite a bit of work with him recently, and I do call him Tom. But that's something I tend to do only once I've had permission or I've done something a few times, and I have done stuff with Tom a fair few times. Great model shot. I love a model shot. Although the flames are too big, aren't they? Yeah, the flames look slightly too big because obviously they're the size they are on a model which is bigger. I don't know. They just seem slightly out of shape compared to the thing that they're on. Now, is that the clip? Because I remember at the end of Who's Doctor Who, the documentary, it goes, "No, Doctor, you shall not die yet," and then it goes into. But of course, that's ending the documentary, saying, this is the end of the documentary, and you shall not die. You will carry on, and there'll be more Doctor Who. So I was never quite sure where the cliffhanger was, and I'm still never am quite, because I've as I say, I've rarely seen this in this form. So yeah, it's when the Doctor, and he does do that, doesn't he, Tom Baker? He's very good at painful grimaces. He sells pain very, very well. He's John McGlashan, he died this year. Excellent film cameraman. Christine Rusco is she's still about and is a very, very good designer. She's done a great job of this. Female designer, female director. That's very interesting. So look. Ooh, I love the bit in the hut. I love the whole dynamic with Elizabeth Sladen and Tom Baker. I love Gabriel Wolfer-Sutek. I love Bernard Archard as Marcus Scarman. Love the dialogue. Animated human cadaver. Maybe he sneezed. Like, what is it, mending wristwatch with a hammer and chisel? But I think I'm going to go, because I love the character actors and I love the guest stars and I like, the little guest stories we get, and part of the fun of Doctor Who is, rooting for the guest characters who may well die, which you kind of know that the Doctor and the Companion won't, and it's, it's that guessing game that you play of will they get through, and I think you invest in them. When it's done well, you invest in them. And certainly in part 3, to get somebody like Lawrence Scarman dying. Oh, but the Doctor's reaction to that as well is great. That Inhuman, which is so against my view of what the Doctor is, and yet it totally works because it also ties in with my view of what the Doctor is, which is, an aloof, detached alien. But he's also supposed to be my friend, and I didn't see that alien stuff in him so much when I was a kid. I didn't think, did I? I don't know. I didn't analyse it. But Tom Baker is so good at that detached, doom-laden alien stuff. And it's because and yet he, as I say, he does it without coming across as a git. But no, my thing is the two guest actors facing it off. It's a beautiful scene. It's really well acted. It's really desperately sad. You care. You even care about Marcus, and he's been dead since the first scene. It's the scene between Marcus and dead Marcus, live Lawrence, soon to be dead, soon to be joining their number. It's the scene in which both the Scarman brothers are finally conjoined in death. It's really well done. So I'm going to choose that. What's Richard Bignell chosen? Oh, knowing him, a geographical location, because that's his thing. No, I bet he's choosing something very good, because he's been playing along very nicely. So this is his part 3 best thing. Here we go.
Now, I know you love your actors, Toby. So for part 3, I'm going to focus on a performance. For this episode, I would really like to sing the praises of Michael Sheard as Lawrence Scarman. Now, Sheard appeared in Doctor Who 6 times during his career, in The Ark, The Mind of Evil, Pyramids of Mars, The Invisible Enemy, Castrovalva, and Remembrance of the Daleks. But I think that Lawrence Scarman is by far and away his finest performance. I think that Lawrence is a wonderfully rounded out character, so brought to life by Michael Sheard. I absolutely love how proud he is when the Doctor asks him to demonstrate his Marconi scope. The childlike glee and enthusiasm he shows when he gets to enter the TARDIS. His palpable sorrow and sadness after he panics in the lodge when trying to save his brother, resulting in the failure of the Doctor's plan to break the link with Sutekh. But above all, the absolute pathos in his final scenes, where he finally confronts Marcus and desperately tries to break through to whatever might be left of him by showing him a photograph of them as boys, leading to his sad and pathetic whimpers as his brother finally turns on him, leading to his on-screen death. Now, there are some really fine acting performances going on throughout Pyramids of Mars, but I think Michael Sheard gives an absolutely standout performance that really lingers in the memory.
Oh, what a lovely tribute to a wonderful actor and a fine servant to Doctor Who. I was lucky enough to meet him once. Unfortunately, I then got a bit drunk. Don't drink anymore. It might not have been my finest hour, but I was lucky enough to meet him, and he was a good guy. And he was great with the fans, but he was, and this is, I think, sometimes forgotten because he was so familiar, is that he was a really, really good actor. I like all his performances. I think he's lovely in Castrovalva as well, and I like Dr. Summers. But no, this is his best. This is his best turn, and yes, Richard was right to celebrate that. I got a little bit of that because I picked a scene that he was in. So do I get half a point? Do I get a quarter of a point? I mean, I'm not going to win, so I will leave it in your hands. Your hands. Oh, those were Michael Sheard's last words in the episode, so they'll be mine as well. It's episode 4 of Pyramids of Mars. I think myself and Richard Bignell, my guest, and Richard, if you don't know him, is the doyen of Doctor Who researchers. He's written a brilliant book on Doctor Who on location, which features what's going on with Pyramids of Mars. And he's chosen some very good things. I think he's already won the competition where I have to see if I can guess the best things about it. Well, I think it's I have to see if I can guess what their favourite thing is. Well, I haven't been doing that for the whole of the podcast. It's only just occurred to me. We're a year in. I just choose my favourite thing and hope they've chosen it as well. I occasionally indulge in a bit of gamesmanship, but I have to be honest as well, because I'd hate it if I chose something that I was doing artfully in order to try and catch them out, and then they chose the thing that I really liked. So, yeah. I'd rather be wrong than be right in my heart and then choose the wrong thing and then choose the right thing, because that would be a really bitter failure. At least if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail with the right taste in my mouth. Right. It's part 4 of Pyramids of Mars. This will be interesting, I hope. And we're going to press play, or I'm going to go select, because I'm on episode selection on the DVD, in 3, 2, 1. Now, the reason, and it's going to start, the reason I say it's interesting, because often I say interesting when I can't think of anything else to say, and it's a way of buying myself a little bit of time, and it's like a tick, like my ums, and I hate myself for both, and this is why I can never listen to myself, which makes editing these slightly awkward. Isn't it odd? Because they say about people who talk a lot, they like the sound of their own voice. Well, I talk an awful lot, and I hate the sound of my own voice. So, because actually you don't listen to yourself when you're saying things out loud. So actually, the talk drowns out everything else. It's a beautiful model. So listen, Pyramids of Mars, episode 4. I have seen less often than the rest of it, because you'll recall from episode 1, I think on the repeat, when this repeated when I was at university, I only had the time or inclination or tape, or I might have even forgotten. I remember being annoyed with myself afterwards, to tape the first 3, whereas only moments before, a couple of years before, I would have called off everything, and I would have been pin sharp and precise in my, taping broadcast quality Doctor Who off air, was stop all the traffic. But I suppose because I'd got the broadcast quality, it's one of the best qualities I had, no bootleg, because it was the VHS. And I think I probably hadn't realised how edited, particularly parts 1 and 4, the Omnibus Pyramids of Mars was. Because they didn't do that, say, with Robots of Death. They didn't cut anything out of it. But yeah, this had bits lopped out. But I'll tell you what. So when I did properly sit down and watch this in episode form, maybe for the only time, apart from when I then did it for Running Through Corridors, the book that's taken longer to write than any other book in the history of time, that I'm still writing with Rob Shearman, still editing with Rob Shearman, where he and I watched Doctor Who in chronological order. So I probably watched this properly twice, maybe 3 times in this form, and that's not a lot for me for a Doctor Who story. As I'm saying it out loud, I still quite a few times, but I consider this one of the least familiar in its proper form. Whereas I've seen this in its VHS form, dozens of times. But I remember when I got this on this very DVD I'm watching, thinking that Pyramids really went up the Swanee and really lost its luster in this final episode. Everyone's dead apart from Marcus Garman. Well, he's dead. So it's just the Doctor and Sarah, but this stuff's great, isn't it? Tom Baker is so good at this agony. Look at that. There's not a half-hearted atom in his performance, but it's not over the top. It's not, and if he watched this now, he would probably laugh at this and go, "Oh, look, I'm really, isn't that? Oh, I'm giving it." No, and he's a much better actor than he gives himself credit for, and we mustn't let the fact that he now treats it all as a bit of a lark and, "Oh, wasn't I lucky to be Doctor Who?" This is a committed acting performance, and he's really good at the melodrama, and don't mistake the word melodrama for a pejorative term. Shakespeare is melodramatic. It's the stuff of the drama that makes you sit up and pay attention and can talk about things that take you out of the room that you're in, and the semi-detached. Are we semi-detached? No, we're terraced. The terraced house at the end of a row in Manchester on a gloomy winter evening in the 21st century. Melodrama takes you to time and space and to curses and to witches and to magic and to worlds of gods and monsters and Grand Guignol, and where emotions are heightened, where pain is heightened, where stakes are heightened. This is the stuff, and it takes actors of a certain elan and a certain, I think, classical tradition, and certainly gravitas, to pull it off, or to be exemplars in the way that Tom Baker is. And Tom Baker is an exemplar of this sort of the stuff. And yet he sort of tries to reason as well, and he does seem quite sort of, there's almost a deference there as well when he's saying, but come on, mate, you're evil. But he's not glib. He is addressing this creature as if it's a god. But you are a twisted abhorrence. Oh, it's such glorious. I wish I could feast on this dialogue without talking through it, but I know that is not what the podcast is for. And the pin-sharp precision of the evil, haunting tones of Gabriel Woolf. It's unfortunately, you could tell that his TARDIS key medallion is on strings. It's quite fun that they've said, Sutik has the mental power to sort of drag them over, but only on invisible strings. But that's okay. No, that's okay. That's fine. I think that any sort of I've picked out quite a few things that I don't think quite work in this, but it's only oddly where there are other stories where I wouldn't mention a lot of stuff that clearly doesn't work because this story is so good on so many levels. It's almost like you have to go, well, I do have to point out that there are a couple of bits that niggle me, but the major niggles in this, the niggles in this are the major niggles in this are very minor, but it's because they are surrounded by greatness, and you probably wouldn't even notice them as niggles in certain other stories because everything else is going wrong elsewhere. And that's not to go. There are Doctor Who stories that don't have the wonderful qualities that these have, that I still find very entertaining for different reasons. But I think this is genuinely good. This is genuinely strong. Look at Elizabeth Sladen looking scared. And it's just these are, because I've done pretty well with this story. I've met I never met Elizabeth Sladen. I did write to her, and I have a signed photograph of her. I wrote to her to do an interview for my fanzine. I never wrote a fanzine, but I'd intended to. So I wrote to Elizabeth Sladen and Nick Courtney, and I got a signed picture from Elizabeth Sladen, and I got a little note from Nicholas Courtney. That was nice, wasn't it? But I had a letter from Bernard Archard. I met Michael Sheard. I had a letter from Peter Copley, who played Dr. Warlock. I met... I've said Peter Copley, haven't I? I've met Gabriel Woolf. I met Nick Burnell, the Mummy. Peter Mayock, no, I don't think he even did an event or anything, and wasn't working when I was around. Vic Tablian, whose Ahmed is still around, so there's still got a chance with Vic Tablian. And Michael Collins never had the chance, but I've met Christine Rusco, met Philip Hinchcliffe, I met Paddy Russell. Been to Paddy Russell's house. I have Paddy Russell's cat litter tray in the room upstairs. That's what I store various files and folders of hers that I have, because they were very kindly bestowed upon me. And I've got some of her photos. She's got loads of lovely slides and photos from all sorts of productions, except for any of her Doctor Who's. We found some slides, and they look like actually the same woods as here. It was like, are these lovely summary pictures of Doctor Who on location? No, completely different production. I did find some that I gave to Steve Roberts for something they were doing at the BBC that I know that they'd found useful for something. I can't remember where they were, but they were a Rudolph Cartier production from late 50s, early 60s. So she could, she was taking photos then or in the vicinity to be taking photos home. She could have had some from the massacre. She could have had some from Quatermass. She didn't. Oh, she did. She had one from Quatermass in the Pit that I've not seen anywhere else. That's now on the Quatermass in the Pit Blu-ray. Do you know what? I seriously considered holding it back because I've got a book coming out, and I thought it would be nice to have an exclusive. But no, I've got it, and this is the definitive DVD. It won't be definitive if it doesn't have a picture that I know that exists. So counterintuitive, and seeing as I know that there are some photos from Doctor Who that could easily be on some DVDs and Blu-rays that we know that people have got who I don't know what they're waiting for, but are not willing to share. And I get very cross with that sort of attitude. I cannot then be an embodiment of that attitude, even though I did feel as soon as I scanned it and passed it on, I went, oh, what did I do that for? But I think hopefully in the when I look back on my life, I'll go, no, that was the correct thing to do. I always think of the line in City of Death, wasn't it? It's something about, when they talk about, having it's an expensive boast or whatever, having one of the Mona Lisas, and yet having a Mona Lisa in a private collection, but nobody know that you can have it because then it wouldn't, because it's been stolen. It's the ultimate avarice, really. But I suppose, but with these photos, actually, I think the person knows that, or the person, it's not just one person. There are various people who've got various photos that we know that they've got, but who like the idea of keeping them to themselves, which that's not my bag, but people can do what they like. I just think it's a shame. And again, what with these Blu-rays coming out are going to be as definitive as it gets, I think. So, what are you waiting for? Anyway, I'm digressing. I sometimes give a lecture. I'm sorry about that. But lectures should be written and thought out and have persuasive arguments on either side. Whereas I'm talking on the top of my head whilst half watching a Doctor Who episode. But that's what this podcast is, for better or worse. And if you're still listening, I'm grateful. It's partially because I think I'd geared my mouth to go into overdrive during this episode because I know that it's a lot of actors looking at walls. And, I don't think episode 4 of Death to the Daleks is the best episode of Death to the Daleks, which I do like as a story, and I like more and more as I've seen it later in life. But to do it again, to have one story that ends with people walking through a building made of puzzles, can be seen as unfortunate. Twice seems like a policy, and of course and there's no real satisfaction in the solving of the tricks either. Although again, it's worth it for the smiles that Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen give each other. I could watch these two all day. And it's a great, it greatly illustrates the Doctor's intelligence and powers of deduction. And in fact, I've recently been doing a Too Much Information podcast on episode 3 of the Daleks, and Sidney Newman sends a memo to Verity Lambert saying what I liked about this episode. This is the guy who, we're told had, rejected the Dalek story on principle because it was about bug-eyed monsters. So he sends Verity Lambert this memo saying, I like the way they got out of the prison because they used their deductive powers, and it's all about how they solve a problem. Is that stuff in the BBC video? I don't think it is. I think this bit is where he measures the shape with his scarf and all of that. Coming up, we've got Marcus Scarman with the 2 different shape things out. I think my granddad could solve this, and he's been dead since 1988. But to be fair, so Marcus Scarman's been dead for quite a long time. But you know what I mean? It is a childish stratagem. It's one of the shapes is different. You'd have this in the Weekend Guardian magazine on a Sunday, and it comes out on a Saturday, but you'd leave it to the Sunday to do the puzzle page, and you know that you'd go, that was fairly straightforward. And I seem to recall Philip Hinchcliffe on the DVD commentary sort of going, I think we're pushing it a bit here, and I'm not sure Paddy wanted them to do that, Paddy Russell. And I could call her Paddy, can't I? I've got a litter tray. I went to a funeral. But I think it needs it. I think it needs them to do that. Marx Brothers. We're walking in and we're not even looking at each other in sync. We shall turn round and not break our stride and go back out the way we came. I think that's delightful. I think that's cover. I like her peevishness that she does very well, but again, it's not annoying. There's a warmth to it, and I'll tell you what, there's a truth to it. It's real people batting back and forth. That's nonsense. The bit with the scarf and all of that. It's that's not what the puzzle is. I mean, God bless you for trying to make it work. And he measured it across. Yeah, I mean, what he did there bears no resemblance to what the puzzle is, but it sort of doesn't matter because of that beaming smile and and actually, but seeing as that, we're stuck in this, tiny location. I like the sort of lava wall business that's going on. I don't quite know what it is, but it's an attempt to stop it just being, drab flats. There's angles, but particularly that molten bit that is, clearly a bit of, front axial projection or whatever it is, replacing some CSO panels. But that's a clever piece of design, and the beautiful colours in Sutek's cell and that sort of oil slick like kaleidoscope. It's very handsome, seeing as it is. I'm sure that bit wasn't. I'm sure this bit wasn't in the VHS as well. So much that they lopped out, and I'm afraid to say, Pyramids of Mars, much as I like you, not hugely to its detriment. This I don't mind because I love that, and I love when he puts relax and he writes it the right way, and the way that she goes, the way that she does the kind of whatever, but he's really obviously genuinely terrified. He doesn't know what to do, but she's trying to invest it with a bit of humour as well. It's really well judged and played. Seeing as all it is stuck in a plastic tube. Tom Baker's making it the emotional and dramatic climax of the episode. But what it is it's, and I like the sort of gold Horus mummies, making good use of resources to have a slightly different look at this stage in the episode. But I actually, as a kid, I love the puzzle game, and I was often reading, books about, what's the Greek one about, what has 2 legs, 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at lunchtime, and 3 legs in the afternoon. Oh man, because blah, blah. And you always thought you were clever if you'd worked those out, and they were something you could take to school with you, armed with something that you could, get a conversation going with, and talk to your friends about, and see if you could outwit people. So I think, although it's dreadful padding, it within the context of Doctor Who, I think it's perfectly legitimate to do this, and it's an age-old thing, isn't it? It's called the something dilemma, isn't it? Where if I told you, if he says what it is, what we've just seen, it's an actual thing, bunged into Doctor Who at a climactic moment when the stories run out. and I think it's okay. I think that works okay. And this is all right. I like the fighting mummies. And he's going to release Sutek. Oh, and of course, and that mask's okay. There we go. And actually, of course, I say Marcus is dead, but we actually have this moment here where there's just he's dead, but there's still a lingering bit of consciousness. I wonder if in the script it was supposed to be just, Sutek going, I'm free, as Bernard Archer, as Marcus Scarman, and then, the body collapsing. But I like the suggestion there that actually he momentarily, Marcus Scarman returns to us, and goes, oh, I'm free, and then I'm free, and does his Mr. Humphreys, and then dies. And I like the dead body effects. That's the sort of thing I thought was terribly grown up when I was a kid, and would hope that my friends were looking at that moment, because it was a bit like special effects in a Hollywood movie. I mean, yeah, it was for Doctor Who's turns. Oh, this is a brilliant speech, and he does it so well. It's not even that brilliant speech, but it's a great moment. The close up, the fact that Gabriel Wolfe can mesmerize just through the sheer force of his voice. Well, not force of his voice, because it's actually quite a high register, but it's glass. It's like a terrifying wine glass, a terrifying vocal wine glass. Oh, and of course, we get the hand of Sutek, which would I have noticed if I read about it in the radio, I think the Matrix databank in Doctor Who magazine. I should really interview the hand, shouldn't I? For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, when Sutek stands up, there's a hand holding his cushion down. But if you don't know that, you've got some things about Doctor Who to find out, because I think it's one of the first mistakes anybody ever finds out about Doctor Who, isn't there? Is the hand of Sutek, and there's some plausible science to this, I think, isn't there, about the fact that, yes, because I was talking about this to somebody the other day, about the fact that the stars in the sky that are shining down on us, some of them. There's a brilliant Welsh comic called Noel James, who was always one of the circuit's most underrated talents, but I think he did do Britain's Got Talent relatively recently, so I think more people know him now. But he's an absolute surreal genius, and he does a wonderful line at the end of his set where he go, well, I've been a star tonight. By the time I reached most of your consciousnesses, I'd already died. And that's which is a great joke. My name is, in fact, Noel Wynne James, but I don't pronounce the in fact. I love him. Live comedy is great, and there's some people who've never been on telly who are absolutely marvellous. So do go and see your local live comedy gig. But this whole thing about there being a delay, I'm sure it's, I'm sure a proper scientist will go, well, but it doesn't work because of this, and this. If you have a basic science thing going on, you go, oh no, that makes sense to me. The length of time, there is a gap between it reaching Earth. But then, of course, they have to travel in the TARDIS, so when's then and when's now. But it's fine. I've bought the fact that they're not travelling. That's why bringing time travel in an adventure, I always think is a tricky ask for me, which I'm sure we will discuss when we get to some of the more modern timey-wimey episodes. But He can't go back to 2 minutes before, but he can do this because this is the 2 minutes in real time. So he travelled in space in the TARDIS, but not in but not in time. This is a neat. Oh, because of course in the book it's bookended, isn't it? By Sarah reading the file about what happened. And in fact, I think, because it's quite a short bit at the end, it's got a slightly different setup in the Target book, the epilogue, isn't it? I think I read that first, so I by the time I read the book proper, I already knew Lawrence was going to die because my brother's Hector told me, and then I think I pretty much knew what happened to everybody. That's a fantastic shot. Look at that. Well done. That looks to me like the house is on fire. It's a brilliant, and a great final shot to the episode. Well, look, I mean, I distracted myself as much as anything during that, but actually, kudos to the BBC Video people. Actually, I mean, no, I would never say release an archive thing that has been molested. I'm always as, close to broadcast as possible kind of guy. Or exactly as broadcast in terms of the actual, content. But that said, I was expecting something. I was expecting to have to kill a lot more time, but actually the beginning stuff between Sutek and the Doctor is compelling and brilliant, and they're both fantastic. There's a neat ending that works for me in terms of the fact it tries to be science fiction, scientific-y. And the bits in the middle, well, actually the logic problem I think is absolutely fine. It's very Doctor Who-y, and the acting from Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen in that scene is so excellent. So it's only really the switch of doom and the 50p sliding puzzle from a garage of doom bits in the middle that are you're kind of taking the piss here, guys. Especially when Sarah even has the audacity to say this is like that story from a couple of years ago. But it's interesting because I would still isn't it funny? Because Pyramids of Mars is so good for its first 3 episodes, I still think it's an all-time classic, even though I think Part 4 is a bit of a shocker in terms of plot, in terms of script. They've kind of run out of story. And there's all sorts of logistical issues with Pyramids of Mars as well. And yet it's the confidence of the performance, the synthesis of the design and the direction, and just that the muscularity of storytelling in all departments, not just the scripts and the lines, but in all departments that Philip Hinchcliffe strives for at all times, means that I am much more forgiving of it than I am of perhaps stories from other eras. I do think this is such a strong era, and I think it's I've seen people making perfectly fair criticisms of the Holmes Hinchcliffe era in more recent years, but I will not join their number, and I do think they're the high watermark of the classic era. I think it's serious television being made by serious people, who are also all very funny. So what are my favourite things? I can't remember what I chose. Oh, I chose the cliffhanger for Part 1, and I chose the shooting of Professor Scarman in Part 2, didn't I? And I chose the Scarman and Lawrence scene in Part 3, and Richard has chosen Dudley Simpson's music, hasn't he, for Part 1? Did he choose the Mummies for Part 2? And he chose Michael Sheard for Part 3. I think I'm going to choose... I think they're so good in this. Tom Baker and the dynamic, just the dynamic all the way through of Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. Perhaps that's my bonus thing. I'm not always going to choose the Doctor and the Companion. You've got to sort of take it for granted that I like the Doctor and the Companion, because I do, on the whole, always like the Doctor and the Companion. But I think they're especially good in this, and I think they're going through an especially strong phase. And there's an added edge to their relationship that is in no way difficult to watch, that is in no way phony, that is in no way bickering. It's just real, but it gives the whole thing a convincing shadow. and yet they're both, but they're also both so likable, and they clearly both like each other, and I think that really is important. And they're both terribly, terribly good actors. And I can't not say Gabriel Woolf. It's odd because I mean, if I'd done this 10 years ago, I'd have chosen Bernard Archard as Marcus Scarman as well, because I think it's a brilliant. But see, because Richard chose a performance and he chose Michael Sheard. Do I want to choose a performance? Or do I want to choose just the Egyptology thing which pervades it all? Or Christine Rusco's design. So Paddy Russell's direction, which is so unobtrusively good that she almost does her no favours in terms of winning prizes. Do you know what I mean? She's the Martin Scorsese of Doctor Who. She's so good we almost take her for granted. Oh gosh, I mean, even Holmes Hinchcliffe, you know. I'm going to go for Egypt, just because I think the atmosphere that it's provided, the fact that I remember the stories of Lord Carnarvon and all of that. I remember being told those at school, and it being, this is a real thing, and there's this curse of Tutankhamun. And, oh my God! And I remember being absolutely chilled and reading. I found some mythology book in the dusty book at home, and reading about that and getting a real sort of prickle on the back of the neck. So going, yeah, let's buy into all of that. And it also gives us the mummies, which are also then reminiscent of the films. But also the way that they turn that Egyptology into spacey science fiction stuff as well. So Pyramids of Mars, isn't that a brilliant juxtaposition? In fact, what a great title of the ancient horror, but also real as well, and earthy, geographical but wondrous, and space. So it's a synthesis of history and sci-fi and horror and sci-fi, which is why I think a winning combination. So yes, Egypt and that whole thing. And then for my overarching thing, I will choose Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen's dynamic, because it's not just the performances, it's the writing of that as well. So with honourable mentions to Bernard Archard, Gabriel Woolf, Paddy Russell, Christine Rusco, and Hinchcliffe/Holmes. So a lot of people could have taken a prize away today, and it's not the winning guys, it's the taking part, and thank God you all did. I wonder if Richard has chosen any of them, and do you know what? It might be fair if he does. Part 4. Richard Bignell.
So we're on to part 4, and we finally get to travel to the eponymous Pyramids of Mars, where admittedly everything starts to look a little bit cheaper in the production. Although I think those flowing patterns CSO'd onto the walls of the corridors do look rather nice.
Yeah, I see that.
So the latter part of this episode involves rather a lot of Marcus and his mummy, and the Doctor and Sarah travelling from right to left across the screen and having to solve a number of fiendish siren traps, including Sarah getting caught in the Decatron crucible. In other words, a clear plastic pipe. But this is actually my favourite thing that I'm going to choose for this episode. And it's for 2 reasons. Firstly, there is the neatness in the execution of the effect of the crucible appearing. Now that effect required Elizabeth Sladen to stand still on her mark and remain so whilst the tube was lowered over her. Now, more often than not, these sort of effects don't really work, because there's always some slight movement either of the actor or of the camera between the 2 shots. And it's the reason why a couple of sequences showing lock controls appearing by doors were edited out of this episode. If you go and have a look at the deleted scenes on the DVD, you'll see just how much movement there was between the shots and the reason why they took them out. But not in this case. The effect here is flawless, and Elizabeth Sladen doesn't move a muscle. Now initially I thought this must have been done via an overlay of the crucible being vision mixed over the shot of Sarah, but the script shows that they didn't do that. The shot was locked off, Recording stopped, and then they lowered the contraption over Sladen and then started again. Now, the riddle of the Osirans with the two guardians is a very old puzzle, and it appears in many different forms. But to a 9-year-old viewer, however, I'd never heard of it, and to be honest, I really didn't understand the explanation as given by the Doctor. It wasn't until a year later, when the Target novelisation was published, that I could take my time to read the puzzle and to understand how the solution worked. And I remember being so pleased with myself when it suddenly clicked into place and I could understand how asking either guardian just one particular question would lead you to the same answer. So for those reasons, the scenes around the Decatron Crucible are a favourite of mine.
Oh, Richard's a favourite of mine. I mean, he explained the joy of the logic puzzle much better than I did, and I mean, you could tell as well he was living that, wasn't he? And I love that, and that is a very important part of Doctor Who, the bits that connect with you when you're a kid. And I absolutely agree with him that when you read that, when you finally understand it, and you go, oh right, okay, oh yeah, I've got a thing, and it does. It's one of those things that just puts a little spring in your step. It makes you feel like you're understanding the world a little bit more, or actually you understand a part of the world that will be confusing to some. Yeah, that's great. And also his description of you know how it all worked in the studio, because he probably knows what the floor plan looked like, is a lovely insight into just how good that tiny moment that requires a lot of skill in a lot of different departments, that is on screen for half a second, is, and just how much hard work went into these things that are so often sort of now by stupid people dismissed for being shonky, which no, they were a lot of people working very hard with limited resources to do stuff that is actually amazing. So thank you, Richard. So he's chosen, I didn't know it was called the Decatron Crucible, or if I did, I've forgotten because I'm very old and nearly dead. Right. Where did that come from? Right. I was writing an obituary all day yesterday. I think I'm a bit raw. Bonus item for Richard Bignell.
So 4 lovely things about Pyramids of Mars. And what's even nicer is that I get to choose a 5th extra one. And for this, I'd like to choose the way that Pyramids of Mars deals with the subject and concept of time itself. Now, when the TARDIS arrives at the beginning of the story at the Priory in 1911, we're quickly told that this is the location where unit headquarters will be in the future. But it won't be this house, because this Priory will be burned down. Now, what seems to be a throwaway line at the beginning, of course, ends up coming full circle by the end of the story, when we see for ourselves the actual reason why the building was destroyed. And of course, the whole denouement of Sutek's defeat is based around the subject of time. Now, I have to admit that as a 9-year-old, I wasn't terribly clear about what the relationship was between where Sutek was imprisoned in Egypt and the pyramid up on Mars containing the Eye of Horus that powered the force field holding him in place. It was very easy to get all of that muddled up in my head. However, when Sutek succeeds in destroying the Eye of Horus on Mars, the frenetic dash to get back to Earth is all based around the fact that there is a time delay between the two planets. The Doctor and Sarah rush back to the Priory, and they're able to fling Sutek off into the vortex just in time before the signal is finally broken. It is a wonderful, tense finale, even if they do fudge the science a little bit. Radio waves don't really take 2 minutes to travel between Mars and Earth, as the Doctor says. They actually take anywhere between about 4 and 20, depending where the planets are in the solar system. However, it is a great time-based conclusion. Now, I said earlier that part 2 had some really good material to choose from. For that episode, I chose The Lumbering Mummies, but it was a close-run thing with the brief segue as the Doctor takes Sarah and Lawrence into the future to see the world as Sutek would leave it. And if you chose that as your best bit, Toby, then I really don't blame you for a moment. For once, the programme makes a concerted effort not only to tell us, but also to show us why the Doctor can't leave halfway through a story and go off somewhere else. There are consequences to getting involved with things that have already happened. Now, whether or not you think this explanation works or not is probably by the by. The fact is, they try to give a logic and a reason to it. You can't just walk away, you have to see things through. And finally, on the subject of time, I'd just like to go back to the burning of the Priory that we mentioned earlier and give a mention for the brief 2-page epilogue that Terence Dicks includes at the end of his novelisation for Pyramids of Mars. In the book, after the TARDIS dematerialises the burning Priory, Sarah thinks about what they've been through, and she asks the Doctor, won't all this business get out? I mean, didn't it get out back in 1911? Everything that happened at the old Priory? The Doctor looked up from the console. I very much doubt it, Sarah. Time has a way of taking care of these things. Anyway, when you get back home, you can look it up and see. And then Terence adds an epilogue. Time moves forward to a point where Sarah has left the TARDIS and she's finished her travels with the Doctor. And remembering his words, she visits the offices of a local newspaper that's close to Unit HQ. And she goes and she looks up the events of 1911. She reads about the assumed victims of the blaze and the speculation that one of Lawrence Scarman's scientific devices might have been the cause of the fire. Time takes care of things, just as the Doctor indicated. The epilogue concludes. Sarah skimmed through the rest of the report. So that is what the Doctor had meant. The terrible events surrounding the return of Sutekh had found a natural explanation, a deplorable but soon forgotten tragedy in an English country village. Sarah looked through the window, out into the bustling high street of the little country town. She shivered at the memory of the desolate world that she had seen through the doors of the TARDIS, the world Sutekh would have made had he not been defeated. The sacrifice of all those lives had not been in vain. The pity was that no one would ever know. Sarah closed the heavy old volume and went into the summer sunshine of her own unchanged 20th century. And that's a super end to the book. Terence Dicks takes us forward in time to a companion's future after they've left the Doctor. But in doing so, Sarah is able to reflect on the devastated planet that Sutekh would have left, and she is grateful for her own unchanged world.
Richard Bignell has played an absolute blinder. I agree with everything. I almost feel as though I shouldn't comment on anything he said because I agree with it and it's so well put. So what would be the point? It would be gilding the lily. But it has. I mentioned the epilogue in the commentary for part 4, but it's made me realise actually how much I love that epilogue and actually tying it in with the whole thing of time. And of course, I didn't mention at all the whole thing about the fire of the Priory being mentioned as a thing and it being Unit HQ. So it's still sort of tied in with the sort of, you know, the Doctor Who is, although they've put Unit behind them, you know. I always thought of Terror of the Zygons as the sort of end of the Unit era, but actually no, because they go back with Android Invasion, and you see Harry again, and Benton, and a de facto Brigadier. But yes, this is set on the grounds of Unit HQ, so it's still there as a sort of as infused in the DNA, and sort of almost part of the show. The show present, but the show's present, but they're doing it in different ways. But they haven't, just totally, gone away from it. And yeah, that use of time is very, very clever. I hadn't thought of it like that. And I didn't do the going to 1980 scene, which I'm sure I mentioned in episode 2 was going to be one of Russell T Davis's scenes that he was going to choose to have when it was relaunched, because it's that question that the audience have. So it is, it is an important scene in a way. But look, I'll leave it to Richard, because he was a great advocate for all of that stuff, a very eloquent and perceptive advocate. And so what a brilliant guest he's been. Thank you, Richard. I know he's been plugging his stuff on his intros But do get Nothing at the End of the Lane. It's ludicrously cheap on PDF online because printed copies are now a thing of the past, I think. But I'm sure there'll be future ones. He's always doing stuff. His Doctor Who location book is brilliant. All of his stuff is really well researched, and he works like a dog on the Blu-rays because he does a lot of the quality checking. He scans all the PDFs of the production files, which isn't as easy as you think because he has to get clearance from the people who've written them, or the various bits of paper or whatever. I know when he did the one for season 18, I had to give him a number for Clifford Rose because there was a letter from Clifford Rose. So they can't just stick that in; they have to actually get the person's permission. So the amount, and that's just one click on a PDF on what is there something like 1,700 that you'll just sort of zip through, and all of that stuff is done by Richard. He does so much that you behind the scenes that you do not see, and it's because of that sort of passion. But that's not some sort of geeky cataloguing he's done there, is it? There's a real eloquent, perceptive insight that it was a joy to, because obviously this is the first time I've heard any of this, to hear, to witness, to see the enthusiasm, to hear the perceptiveness, and to share in the joy of a communal experience of loving a Doctor Who story, even though our communal experience found us expressing that joy in different ways, because I scored no points or maybe a quarter of a point. But I found that utterly rewarding. And I almost feel bad that I'd suborned myself about the shortcomings of episode 4 when actually I should have just got into it with the enthusiasm of somebody expecting to enjoy it. Because actually, or maybe I didn't. Maybe because I had low expectations. I found it. I did do a lecture about a quarter of the way in, though, didn't I? Doesn't matter. I cannot change. I've committed to this timeline. I cannot change what has happened to it. Ha ha ha, as Richard so eloquently pointed out. Well, look, I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I think Pyramids of Mars is one of the greats of Doctor Who. My brothers were right. Is that this is when Doctor Who is really good. I mean, I think Doctor Who is generally really good, but yeah, I totally buy the greatness of Pyramids of Mars. So thank you for being here. Please join me for another one of these. Great thanks to Richard Bignell. He's on Twitter, and it's at Nothing Lane, I think, something like that. So follow him because he's always coming up with interesting stuff. But I would like to thank Doctor Who for bringing Sutek's gift of the Pyramids of Mars to all humanity. Goodbye. Well, thank you very much for listening to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, presented by me, Toby Hadoke, with my special guest, Richard Bignell, who can be found on Twitter at Nothing Lane. I'm grateful to Richard and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedstone, Tim Arding, Chris Arkle, David, Nigel Bromley, Jenny at Blue Box 99, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Crocker, Rob Dawson, Brad Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galichon, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Joe Llewellyn, Ian K. McLachlan, Gavin McLean, Nathan Martin, The Missing Episodes Doctor Who Podcast, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matty Cirillo, Frank Shales and David Trainier. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you would like to become a patron, you too can have your name read out on the credits, like what those people just had done to them. They paid from as little as £3 per month. That is the lowest tier, at which you get most things, including getting your name read out. Your name gets read out more often the higher up the tiers you go. But other than that, all the tiers are pretty much equal. You do get a few little things as you ascend, but pretty much everything is at the £3 tier, which also you can get a 10% discount on if you sign up for a year in advance. Again, that happens across the tiers. And for that, you get bonus releases, advanced material, exclusive releases, and you're ahead with everything. 6 months ahead with Happy Times or Places, and a month or so with Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic. And yes, you get Far Too Much Information, which is a podcast all to yourselves. And there's monthly AMAs and various other goodies as well. That's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. That's a monthly commitment, though, and if you can't do that, I totally understand. You can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke if you particularly like an edition, or you're feeling particularly flush, or you just think I sound particularly wan and needy. That's at ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. You can pay whatever you like there, in any denomination you choose. It's metaphorical coffees. That's how it works there. But look, I know times are tough financially for one and all, and they appear to be getting worse. So I'll tell you what costs you nothing. Going to iTunes or Spotify or Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts from, and giving these a 5-star rating. That really helps to separate us from the crowd. And perhaps popping a few lines of review to lure people here so they can avail themselves of whatever goodies you find or you designate to be available within Toby Hadoke's time travel. So that really helps. I don't do advertising or any of that business. It's an entirely word-of-mouth situation. So if you put the word into cyberspace, cyberspace's mouth will roar in my favour, and I'd be very grateful. I think that'll do, don't you? Oh, Pyramids of Mars is very good, but I'll tell you what I noticed putting this podcast Omnibus together is that there was a mistake in the original episode 2 as released. I'd had to break off the recording, and then I pieced the two bits together, and I pieced them together wrong, so there's a sort of glitch and a 3-4 second silence in the episode 2 as released, which nobody noticed or pointed out, and then episode 3 started with a bit of a gap after the first music sting and my introduction, after Richard had done his bit, and again nobody noticed. It was only when I was piecing this omnibus together that those two very obvious glitches that have been extant on the releases that have been listened to by loads and loads and loads of people, so it almost makes me wonder why I obsess over every much. Well, I think I obsess over every tiny little bit and edit point, and then I make terrible mistakes like that slip through without seeming to notice. I think I'm losing my marbles, because that I don't think I'd have done that back in the day. But anyway, I noticed this time there just appeared to be a hole, and I thought, I better just check that. There's a terrible, terrible mistake, and I checked. Was that a first edit, something like that? No. So I might go back and release, or maybe I won't. I've tarted them up. I've improved them whilst doing this, so I do have now better versions, better edits of episodes 2 and 3. But I suppose they could stay out there as an anomaly, like an early edit, like a 71 edit. Yes, that was the 71 edit of episodes 2 and 3 of Happy Times and Places of Pyramids of Mars, whatever they're called. What are they called? 36.2 and 36.3. Just goes to show how easily mistakes get through. So, you're going to hand it to the production team that they don't get through as often as they might, or certainly as often. There's probably fewer mistakes in the whole of Doctor Who than there have been in releases of Toby Hadoke's time travels. But then again, I am a one-man band is optimistic. I can't play an instrument and clearly can't operate iTunes either. No, what's it called? GarageBand. That's what this is. Anyway, loads to do. So I really enjoyed doing Pyramids of Mars when I recorded it, obviously badly. And Richard Bignell is a marvellous fellow. Do check out his Nothing at the End of the Lane publications and all that he does. And you know what? He just nips. Since I recorded this, he had some time at the BBC Written Archive doing work for himself, and did some stuff on my behalf, again without asking for any thanks or remuneration for his time or anything like that. We love Richard Bignell. He's one of the good guys. Wishing you the gift of joy wherever you are. Ta-ta.